Chapter 1. She found out on a Wednesday. Not in the way important things were supposed to arrive. With warning, with a moment to collect herself, with at least the basic decency of someone sitting her down first. No. Kiera Sable found out that her life had been rearranged while she was still covered in 3 days of mountain dirt, her squad at her back, her boots leaving prints on the path that led home to Silvermane territory. They'd come down from the high pass that morning, all 8 of them, moving at the easy pace of warriors who had done what they set out to do and were in no hurry now that it was over. The rogue nest in the northern range was finished. 6 weeks of tracking, 2 weeks of planning, 1 brutal night of taking the whole thing apart. Kiera had led it, and she was not modest about the fact that it had gone well. Her squad called her Silver for the storm markings on her wolf, and for the past 3 months, that name had meant something sharp and earned and entirely hers. She was in the best mood she'd been in since they'd left. She noticed the flowers first. Little white ones in glass containers, lining the path from the territory gate all the way to the Great Hall. She slowed her stride without meaning to. Beside her, Finn, her second, tall and perpetually sunburned, slowed too. "Someone got mated," he said. "Must have," Kiera agreed. She was trying to think of who had been close. Dura and Soren, maybe. She walked another dozen steps and saw the altar cloth through the Great Hall's open doors. Then she saw her Aunt Fen on the steps. Fen was 62 years old and had survived things that would have ended most people, and she was not, in the normal course of things, a woman who showed alarm. She had a face that had learned to hold still. But she saw Kiera coming up the path and something moved across her expression too fast to contain, and she said, quietly, "Oh, Kiera, just that." 1 sound. Kiera had heard Fen say that twice in her life. Once when her cousin broke both arms out of the same tree on the same afternoon. Once when word came that Kiera's mother wasn't coming back from the border dispute she'd gone to mediate. Her stomach dropped a long way before her brain had worked out why. "Kiera," Fen stepped down from the hall steps, "maybe you should go find your father." Behind her, Finn had gone quiet. She could feel her squad doing the thing they always did when the air changed, settling into stillness, watching her, waiting to follow her lead. She kept her face level. She had a lot of practice keeping her face level. "I'll be a few minutes," she told them and walked toward the hall. Her father had the full council assembled. All 12 of them, arranged around the long table, with the deliberate positioning of people who had been waiting and had sorted themselves in advance. Her father sat at the head, Alpha Thaddeus Sable, gray at his temples now, a man she had always found difficult to read and had spent most of her life trying to read anyway. He looked at her when she came in, and what she saw in his face before he smoothed it away was not guilt exactly. It was closer to the look of someone who has made a decision they knew would cost something, and had made it anyway, and now has to account for it. She sat down across from him because her legs chose to while she was still working out what was happening, and she folded her hands on the table, and she waited. He explained it the way he explained hard things, sequentially, carefully, each piece before the next, so the shape of it built gradually rather than arriving all at once. The Ironridge pack to the east, 3 territories over. Their alpha, a man named Dylan Corvus. The border disputes, 3 of them in the past 4 months, while she was in the mountains, and the losses, and the resources that were bleeding out from those losses, and the other packs that had started watching Silvermane with the patient attention of things waiting for something to stop moving. The mating alliance. 1 week. She sat with her hands flat on the table and listened and did not make a sound. The council watched her. She was aware of them watching her, and it didn't matter. What mattered was keeping her breathing even, because if she stopped paying attention to her breathing, something else would come out, and she wasn't willing to do that in front of 12 people. The future she had been building since she was 12 years old folded itself quietly away while her father was still talking. She felt it go. Like a door closing somewhere deep inside her, not slamming, just clicking shut, very softly, in the way of things that are permanent. She had known, in the abstract way you know things you don't want to be true, that this was one of the paths available to her. She had watched other women in other packs get traded this way. Alliance sealed in a ceremony, life redirected by her father's politics, future reshaped by a man she'd never met. She had been quietly, fiercely, absolutely certain it would not happen to her, because she had a plan and the plan was nearly there, and she had worked too hard and bled too much for it to end this way. She had been wrong. Her father stopped talking. The hall was quiet. "I understand," she said, in a voice that didn't quite sound like her own. Her father let out a slow breath. He said it was for the pack. He said he knew it wasn't what she'd wanted. He said he loved her. He said she knew better than anyone what it meant to fight for what mattered. He was right about that last part. That was, actually, the cruelest part, that he was right, and she knew he was right, and the knowing didn't make it hurt any less. She had never been the currency before. She had always been the soldier. It turned out those felt very different from the inside. "Okay," she said. She pushed back from the table. She walked out of the great hall with the same even stride she used when she was moving through hostile territory and needed everyone around her to believe she had the situation managed. She kept it up until she reached the storage barn at the back of the compound, and then she turned the corner and sat down in the dirt. The same patch of dirt she'd sat in when she was 7, and the world was too big. Some things didn't change. She gave herself 5 minutes. Exactly 5. She'd learned a long time ago that grief needed a container, not a door. You couldn't lock it out, but you could decide how long you'd let it in. 5 minutes was enough to feel the full weight of the thing she was losing, not the title, not the status or the power or any of the things other people assumed were the point. What she was losing was the version of herself she had been building toward, the future that had her name on it. The plan she'd made at 12, with the blazing, unshakable certainty of someone who has found their purpose and doesn't intend to drop it. I had a plan, she thought, a really good one. She put her arms around her knees and let herself feel it for 5 minutes, in the dirt behind the storage barn where no one would see her. Then she got up. She brushed off her knees. She found Finn around the side of the compound, where he was waiting without being asked to, because he had known her for 4 years and he knew what she needed, which was someone nearby who wouldn't say anything. "I need to hand over the Eastern Patrol routes," she told him, "and the 3 files on the rogue sightings near the Northern Pass. I'll need a couple of days to write up the full mission report." Finn looked at her for a moment. "How long do you have?" 6 days. He nodded. "I'll get the files." She had 6 days. She used them the way she used all the time she'd ever been given, completely, without waste. She briefed her squad one by one and handed over everything that was hers to hand. She ran the eastern border twice, partly because it needed running and partly because the movement helped. She wrote the mission report in one long sitting that went past midnight and left her with ink on her fingers and the specific emptiness of having emptied something out. Her Aunt Fen appeared at her door on day 3 with the ceremonial Luna dress on a hanger, with the particular expression of a woman who has chosen her battle very carefully. Kiera looked at the dress. It was pale silk, fitted with embroidery at the cuffs that probably took someone a week to do. It was genuinely beautiful. It was also completely, absolutely, not something she was going to wear to meet a stranger and be handed over to him. "I'll bring it," she said. Fenn's eyes narrowed very slightly. "Kiera." "I'll bring it with me. It'll be in a bag. It exists and I'll have it." "That is not what I'm asking." "I know." They looked at each other. "He's going to think," Fenn started. "He's going to think accurately," Kiera said. "I'm a warrior. He's getting a warrior. That seems like something he should know from the first minute rather." Fenn was quiet for a moment. "Your mother would have loved it if you wore this dress." "My mother is not here." She said it without heat because it was just a fact, and the fact was old enough to have worn smooth. "I'll bring it, Aunt Fen. That's the best I've got." Fen gave her a long look. Then she hung the dress on the door hook and walked away without another word. On the last night, Kiera climbed to the roof of the eastern barracks. She sat on the flat section near the eastern edge with her back against the chimney stack and looked out over Silvermane territory. The training grounds lit up below, the residential quarters to the west, the dark line of the forest beyond the walls. She could hear the pack going about its evening. Voices. A burst of laughter from somewhere near the fire pit. A couple of the young pups shifting and chasing each other around the outer fence, because it was a clear night and they couldn't help it. Everything she had carried inside since childhood pressed against her chest. She thought about the plan, what it could have been if it had worked, and let herself linger in the ache of what she wasn't going to get. Anger flickered, sharp and hollow, then settled into something heavier. Grief. The kind that made her want to scream at the walls of the world and at herself for hoping. Then she thought of Silvermane, her pack, the state it was in, the losses her father had described, the pack she had fought for her entire life, and a slow clarity began to form. It still needed fighting for, just differently. From another angle, another strategy, another version of herself, she realized something that stung but also steadied her. She had never needed the plan to be hers. She had only needed her pack to be safe. That truth didn't soften. It sharpened her resolve. She climbed down and went to bed. In the dark, she listened to the territory settling into night, the rustle of leaves, the distant call of some nocturnal hunter, and let the quiet seep into her bones. Eventually, exhaustion claimed her, and she slept. In the morning, she packed. Weapons first, every single one, including the two she'd acquired on the mountain expedition that were still waiting for a proper clean. She wrapped them carefully and arranged them in the large case she used for long deployments. Then clothes. Then, after a pause that lasted longer than she'd expected, the dress. She put it in the garment bag Fen had provided and laid it on top. She was going to do this completely. She had always done everything completely, because half measures had never been available to her, and she didn't intend to start now. She took one last look at her quarters, the weapons rack on the wall, the rough-edged map of the northern range she'd pinned above the desk, the worn patch of floor where she'd done her morning stretches for 4 years, and she picked up her bags and walked out. Chapter 2. Dylan read the file twice. He did this with everything, read it once to get the shape of it, read it again to catch what the shape had hidden the first time. 8 years of running Ironridge had made him very good at finding the things that files didn't say. The file on Kiera Sable said quite a lot. 47 rogue kills, which was more than most warriors twice her age. Youngest female squadron commander in Silvermane's recorded history. 4 commendations for field improvisation, which meant she was the kind of fighter who didn't just follow plans, but who understood why plans existed and could remake them mid-execution when they stopped working. His senior trainers would pay attention to that. The file also included 2 formal reprimands. The first was for challenging a superior officer to a wrestling match. The specific note read, "To prove a point." The point, the report confirmed, was not specified. The second was for a motivational speech that, and Dylan read this part carefully, inadvertently incited a brawl. Someone had written that in an official document, with a straight face, apparently. He looked up from the file. Garrett was sitting on the far side of the desk, in the way he'd been sitting in that chair for 8 years, relaxed on the surface, attentive underneath, watching Dylan's face do whatever it was doing. Inadvertently, Dylan said, "Her kill count is..." She incited a brawl with a motivational speech. Motivationally, Garrett offered. "That's not better." Dylan looked at the file again. The note at the bottom, added by her squadron captain in what was supposed to be the formal commendation section, read, "Widely regarded as one of the most effective field commanders Silvermane has produced in a generation. Also the worst person to lose an argument to." Dylan read that second sentence 3 times. Her own captain wrote this. He led with the kill count. Her own captain, in the official commendation, documented that she is the worst person to lose an argument to. He probably thought it was a compliment. It isn't. It's a little bit of a compliment. Dylan put the file down and looked out the window. Ironridge was laid out below the office, the training yards, the compound walls, the ordered rows of buildings that had taken 8 years to put where they were. He had started with 11 people and salvaged stone and a very specific idea of what he was building. He knew every corner of this territory. He knew its weaknesses and its strengths. He had built the strengths deliberately, and he had fixed the weaknesses one by one, and the result was a pack that ran the way he'd intended it to run, and he was not sorry about any of it. He thought about his mother. She had been the kind of woman who could make silence feel gracious, who moved through a room the way water moved, finding paths, removing friction, making the space around her feel easier. His father had been a hard man, exacting and remote, and his mother had made the pack love him anyway by being warm enough for both of them. Dylan had watched her for the first 15 years of his life, taking notes he hadn't known he was taking, and somewhere in that time, he had formed a picture of what a Luna looked like. He thought about the wrestling match. She sounds exhausting, he said. She sounds effective. Effective and exhausting are not mutually exclusive. Garrett was quiet for a moment in the way that meant he was deciding whether to say the thing he was thinking. Dylan had learned to wait for this. Garrett's quiet decisions usually produced something worth hearing, even when it was something Dylan didn't want to hear. She'll be Luna, Garrett said finally, which makes Ironridge hers as much as yours. She's Silvermane, Dylan kept his voice even. A ceremony doesn't change where she came from. No, Garrett agreed, but it changes where she is. Dylan didn't answer that. He picked up the file again and looked at the mission photograph clipped to the inside cover. Kiera at some post-patrol debrief, her squad behind her, some kind of mountain terrain in the background. She looked like she'd just come down from a fight. There was mud on her jaw, and she was half smiling at something off camera, and she looked. He noted with the same detached professionalism he brought to evaluating everything, completely at ease in her own skin, in the particular way of someone who had never needed to be otherwise. He put the file in his desk drawer. He was going to be very professional about this. He had run a pack for 8 years on the principle that professionalism was a form of respect, and he extended it to everything, and there was no reason to stop now. Have the guest quarters in the East Wing prepared, he said. She arrives in 5 days. Garrett nodded and stood. At the door, he paused. There's one more thing in the file, her secondary field note. I read it. The part where her captain says, Garrett. That she hasn't lost a wolf under her command in 4 years of active field rotation. Dylan was quiet. Not one, Garrett said. I thought that was worth noting. He left. Dylan stayed at his desk, looking down at the training yards where Riker ran the afternoon drills. 4 years, not a single life lost under her command, and yet from what little he knew so far, she was nothing like the Luna he had imagined. Not graceful or diplomatic, not soft or easy to read. The picture in his mind didn't match the file or Garrett's words. She was precise, disciplined, controlled, and it struck him how different she seemed from everything he had expected. He went to bed that night and lay in the dark longer than usual, turning over the contrast between what he had imagined and the reality he was starting to see. Sleep came eventually, but the thought of her lingered, sharp and unresolved. Chapter 3. The Moonstone clearing had been neutral ground for 300 years, which meant it carried 300 years of weight. Every treaty signed there, every alliance made, every border dispute that had been talked down instead of bled out. The stone circle at its center had names carved into it going back to packs that didn't exist anymore. Kiera had been to the clearing twice in her life, both times as part of her father's delegation, both times as someone standing at the edges watching someone else's life get shaped by what happened in the middle. She had never expected to be the one standing in the middle. She stepped out of the car and looked at the clearing and told herself it was fine. She was fine. This was a thing that was happening, and she was going to do it well, and that was all there was to it. Her wolf stirred restlessly, and she settled her down with the same firm patience she used when her wolf got wound up before a fight. Not a fight, she reminded her wolf. Her wolf's opinion of this correction was visible in the way she kept pacing. She stood with her father and his 2 senior council members and tried not to look at the altar cloth on the standing stone like it was the problem, because it wasn't the cloth's fault. She was wearing the armor. The ceremonial Luna dress was in its garment bag in the car. She was wearing her warrior ceremonial gear, leather, silver inlays at the shoulder and cuffs, dual blades crossed at her back the way she always carried them in the field. War paint on her cheekbones, the silver-gray marks of Silvermane's storm tradition that she had worn in every major ceremony and every hard battle since she'd earned the right to them. Her hair was half braided and half doing whatever it wanted, which was its own kind of tradition. Her father had looked at her when she'd stepped out of the car and said quietly, "Kiera." "I know," she said. "The dress." "I know, father." He'd looked at her for a long moment. She'd looked back. He had taught her to hold a line and he recognized it when she did, and eventually he'd looked away and said nothing else, and she had been grateful to him for that, at least. The Ironridge wolves arrived at the tree line across the clearing. They came in formation, not aggressive, just organized, the way a military pack moved because it was simply how they did things. Precise spacing, the forward scouts flanking the main group, the senior warriors arrayed at the outside edges. It was impressive in the way that things built from discipline were impressive. She could respect it. She had spent 3 months building that in her own squad, and she knew what it cost to maintain. She had about 30 seconds to be professionally appreciative of the Ironridge pack's organizational standards. Then the tree line parted for their alpha, and her brain briefly stopped working. She would think about this later and be annoyed at herself, and the annoyance wouldn't change anything, because the stop was complete and involuntary, over before she had any say in it. He came through the line with his beta at his shoulder, and Kiera, who had faced rogue alphas in the field, who had talked her way through a territorial standoff while bleeding from a cut above her eye, who had a professional reputation built explicitly on never being rattled, had approximately 3 seconds where she had nothing. No thought, no response. Not a single piece of the part of her brain that always had something to say. He was unlike anyone she had ever seen. Tall, dark-haired, solid in a way that spoke of years of hard work rather than show. Amber eyes that caught the daylight like they were lit from within. He moved with a calm, unhurried ease, the kind of presence that made the world seem like it adjusted to him, not the other way around. She had never encountered someone so startlingly, impossibly, striking, and her wolf who had been pacing, restless, and generally uncooperative since they'd left Silvermane, went completely, utterly still. Not cautious, not curious, still, Kiera knew what that stillness meant. It was the kind of recognition that happened before thought, before logic, before there was any evidence at all. Instinct speaking in a voice older than reason. Her wolf looked at Dylan Corvus across Moonstone Clearing and simply knew. The certainty hit Kiera a heartbeat later, bone-deep and unshakable. It settled in her chest like something heavy and inevitable, like a weight finding the exact space it had always been meant to occupy. Oh no, she was not ready for this information. She had approximately 1 second to process the fact that her wolf had apparently made a life-altering decision about a man she had never met. And then he looked at her, truly looked. She felt the moment his gaze landed, measured, assessing, aware. She watched him take her in, from the set of her shoulders to the tension she couldn't quite hide. There was nothing casual about it, nothing dismissive. He was thorough about it. It took maybe 5 seconds and he didn't look away during them, the armor, the blades, the war paint, the complete absence of anything resembling what he'd presumably expected. His face didn't change in any way that a stranger would have noticed. But there was one muscle in his jaw, just below his cheekbone, that tightened and released, and she filed that away because she was a person who paid attention. Then his eyes came back to her face. She lifted her chin. It was a reflex, the same one she'd developed at 14 in the first training yard that hadn't wanted to make room for her, the one that said, "I see you deciding what I am, and I'd like to offer a different suggestion." She hadn't meant to do it. It didn't matter. It was already done. He held her gaze for 3 full seconds. Then he leaned slightly toward his beta and said, in what was evidently meant to be an undertone. And here was the first thing she learned about Dylan Corvus, which was that he was not accustomed to needing to worry about being overheard, because he had exceptional control over most things and wolf hearing had apparently not made the list today. She came armed. His beta said, I see that. To our mating ceremony. And also, yes. She heard every word with the crystal clarity of someone standing 6 feet away with wolf hearing. She watched him realize, half a second later, that she had heard. She watched the calculation happen, react, don't react, reacting is worse, and watched him choose not to react and hold her gaze as though the exchange had not occurred. He recovered quickly. She filed that too. She almost smiled. She pressed it down. She was a professional. They were called to the standing stone. The ceremony elder was an ancient wolf named Bressa, who had been conducting rites at the Moonstone clearing since before either of them was born, and she moved through the formal words with the efficiency of someone who had said them many hundreds of times. The traditional elements went by in the measured cadence of ritual, the calling of the blood, the acknowledgement of the territories, the declaration of intent. And then she and Dylan were standing face to face across the standing stone, and he was close enough that she could feel the warmth of him and catch his scent. And her wolf responded to that scent with an enthusiasm that Kiera found deeply inconvenient. Cedar and cold air and the particular clean smell of someone who worked outdoors, layered underneath with something that was just specifically him. And her wolf settled her chin on her paws in the internal landscape of Kiera's mind and made a very smug sound. Stop it, Kiera told her wolf. Her wolf did not stop it. Dylan's voice, when he spoke, was low and even, with the cadence of a man who chose his words before he used them. Kiera of Silvermane, he met her eyes, will you stand as Luna to Ironridge? Bressa waited, the assembled packs waited. Her father, at the edge of her peripheral vision, was very still. Will you accept a Luna who fights? The clearing went quiet in a specific way, not the silence of nothing happening, but the silence of everyone holding still to see what happened next. Dylan looked at her. Whatever was moving behind those amber eyes, she couldn't read it yet. She didn't know him well enough yet. I accept the terms of this alliance, he said. She heard it, the terms, not I accept you. Not even, I accept this. The terms of the alliance, which was a legal and contractual framing, and told her exactly how he was thinking about this, which was more useful information than it was painful. She noted it. Then I stand as Luna, she said. Bressa continued the rites without missing a beat, which suggested she had heard stranger things at this stone. The remaining words were said, the acknowledgments made, the formal exchange of pack tokens completed. No mating bond formed. She hadn't expected one. Forced arrangements on a cleared ground almost never sparked immediately, and she and Dylan were not looking at each other like two people about to experience a spiritual joining. They were looking at each other like two people who had just drawn up the terms of a very complicated arrangement and were deciding whether to shake on it. She extended her hand. He took it, briefly and firmly, and released it. That was that, then. The drive to Ironridge would take a few hours. She settled into the car Dylan had sent for her. He had driven separately, something about coordinating the pack's return, and watched the territory shift through the window. The familiar Silvermane land gave way to neutral forest, then to stretches of forest she hadn't crossed before, marking the approach to the eastern ranges. The scenery changed subtly at first, trees growing taller, the underbrush thicker. But gradually the land became rockier, sharper. By the time they turned onto the road that led to the compound, the feeling of the territory had changed entirely. This was no inherited land, no place shaped by time and chance. Everything here had been built deliberately. The walls, the compound layout, the placement of buildings to maximize sight lines and minimize vulnerability. Every detail spoke of intention, of a man who knew exactly what he was building and why she respected that. Even then, on the first day, before she knew much about him at all, she respected the decisiveness of it. She just wasn't sure there was any room in it for someone like her. Chapter 4. Dylan was not a man who surprised easily. He had been running Ironridge for 8 years. He had fielded hostile takeover bids, internal challenges, drought, disease, and the particular kind of conflict that arose when you put a large number of strong-willed wolves in close proximity and asked them to function as a unit. He had seen most things. He had a response to most things. Surprise, in his experience, was generally just inadequate preparation, and he worked hard to be adequately prepared. He was not adequately prepared for Kiera Sable. He'd known it the moment she stepped forward at the ceremony. Before the armor registered, before any of it. His wolf had stirred with a low, insistent recognition that was embarrassing given the occasion, and then his brain had caught up with what he was actually looking at, and the two reactions had collided somewhere in his chest and produced something he didn't have a clean word for. She was beautiful in a way that hit before he could brace for it, the line of her shoulders, the curve of her, the quiet coiled strength in how she stood. And then he'd seen the blades crossed at her back and the war paint on her cheekbones, and he had needed a full, slow breath to close the gap between everything he'd expected and everything she was. He had been professional. He had gotten through the ceremony. He told himself on the drive back that the reaction was simply his wolf being his wolf, instinctive, unfiltered, indifferent to reason or occasion. What mattered was how the human side handled it. The human side was going to be measured. Patient. He was going to give this the time it deserved. That plan held until the next morning. He woke before dawn as he always did, dressed, went to get his jacket from the hook by the training yard door. The dark one, worn soft at the elbows, his for years. It was gone. A piece of paper in its place. Borrowed this, cold this morning, K. He stood looking at it. She had been awake before dawn. That alone was enough to recalibrate something very few people in the compound surfaced at this hour unless called. He turned the note over. The back was blank. He read it again as though a second reading might help. It didn't. He went to find Garrett. She took my jacket. Garrett looked up from the inventory he was running. She needed one. She has a wardrobe. I had the storage installed specifically. She grabbed yours. She didn't ask. She left a note. After the fact, Dylan put the note on the desk. There's a supply store stocked precisely so that people don't need to take things that belong to. Did you want her to be cold? Garrett said. Dylan looked at him. Garrett looked back with the expression of a man who had an opinion and was choosing not to voice it, which was its own kind of opinion. Dylan went to find her instead. The stage where they were capable but still assembling the larger picture. She was demonstrating something with her hands, a shift of weight, a redirection of force that looked deceptively simple. The two of them were leaning in, watching with the intense focus of people who knew they were being given something useful. He stopped at the far edge of the yard. His jacket hung off her like it had always belonged there. 2 sizes too large, sleeves shoved carelessly to her elbows, the dark fabric stark against the clean line of her throat. It swallowed her frame and somehow made her look sharper, not smaller like contrast was doing her favors. The morning light caught in her hair, pulled gold through the darker strands, and when she moved, the fabric shifted with her in a way that made it look less borrowed and more claimed. She wore it like she wore everything else, as though it had chosen correctly. Those battered field boots were still on her feet, scuffed, practical, unconcerned with aesthetics. The blade at her hip sat naturally against her thigh, an extension rather than an accessory. She held a mug between her hands, steam curling up in the cold air, and spoke with the quiet confidence of someone who did not need to raise her voice to command attention, and she was magnificent, not in a delicate way, not in a ceremonial way. In the way a storm front is magnificent when it rolls in over open land, contained power, controlled movement, the promise of force if required. There was nothing ornamental about her, nothing hesitant. She occupied space the way someone does who has fought for it and intends to keep it. His wolf noticed her scent on the jacket before Dylan consciously registered it. noticed it, and settled into it with an ease that was deeply inconvenient. He told himself he was observing a training interaction. He was not prepared for the way the morning light hit her when she turned slightly, the brief curve of a smile as Kale executed the movement correctly, the way pride softened her expression for half a second before discipline returned. She looked like she belonged here. That, more than anything, caught him off guard. He stood there longer than he needed to. Then he went back to his office, because he had a pack to run, and standing at the edge of his own yard watching her was not running it. 2 hours later, the jacket was back on the hook, folded properly. Precisely aligned, like she'd taken the time to make sure it sat the way it had before she touched it. No second note. He reached for it automatically and paused. It was still warm, not just from the air from her. When he lifted it from the hook, the scent hit him properly this time, not just her alone, but the way it had settled into the fabric and tangled with his. Leather and smoke and cold morning air threaded through with something sharper, distinctly hers. It wasn't overpowering. It wasn't even obvious unless you were looking for it, his wolf was. The combination did something low and steady in his chest. As if the jacket, as if the territory had been marked and returned. He told himself it meant nothing. He told himself scent transfer was biological and irrelevant. He stood there a fraction too long anyway, fingers tightening almost imperceptibly in the fabric before he shrugged it on. The inside was warmer than it should have been. He went to his afternoon briefing. He was completely fine about all of it. He was. He found her that afternoon crouched in the corridor outside her quarters, a blade in her lap and a whetstone in her hand, 3 more laid out on a cloth beside her. She looked up when she heard him and didn't stop. "Afternoon," she said. He leaned against the opposite wall. "How are you settling in?" "It's a big compound. I keep finding corridors I wasn't expecting." She tilted the blade, checking the edge. "Mara showed up at my door this morning, said she was going to the yard and I could come if I wanted." "That's Mara." "She's good, though." A small pause, and then, without any particular ceremony, "Your pack is good, from what I've seen so far." He nodded. He was watching her hands on the blade, the practiced efficiency of it, and thinking that he had known field commanders who didn't maintain their weapons with this kind of attention. "If you need someone to show you the rest of the territory," he said, "I can arrange that. There are sections the tour didn't cover." "You can assign someone," she said. "I don't want to take up your time." "It's not," he stopped. She was looking at him now, and there was something direct in it that made the polite deflection feel insufficient. He tried again. "I don't mind doing it myself." She held his gaze for a moment. Then she set the whetstone down on her knee and said, "Can I ask you something?" "Go ahead." "How do you want to approach this?" She said it plainly, no build-up. "The two of us. I know it's not a traditional arrangement, and I'm not expecting it to be. I'd rather know what you're thinking than spend the time guessing." He looked at her. He had been told, more than once over the years, that women were difficult to read, that you had to infer what they wanted, navigate around what they said to find what they meant, learn to interpret silences and half-sentences, and the particular weight of things left unsaid. He had accepted this as probably true and had filed it away as something he would deal with when he had to. Kiera Sable had been in Ironridge for one day and had already asked him directly what his intentions were. He was, honestly, a little relieved. "I want to get to know you," he said. "That's the real answer. The arrangement happened quickly and we're strangers, and I think the best thing we can do is not pretend otherwise." He paused. "I was thinking meals might be a place to start, something regular, low pressure." She considered this, so dinner date. "If you want to call it that." "That is what it is." She picked the whetstone back up. The corner of her mouth was doing something, not quite a smile, but close. She was amused. You could have just asked, instead of framing it as a logistical suggestion. "I was getting there." "Were you?" He looked at her. "Do you want to have dinner with me or not?" She looked up at him properly then, and this time she was smiling, the brief real kind. "Yes," she said. "That wasn't so hard." 6 o'clock. 6 o'clock. She went back to the blade. He pushed off the wall. He was almost at the end of the corridor when she said, without looking up, "Also, fair warning, I talk too much when I'm nervous. I can't seem to stop it." He paused. The admission of it was so unguarded, offered so simply, like it was just practical information she thought he should have. He turned slightly. "I'll keep that in mind," he said. "And I already found the kitchen, so if dinner is bad, I know where the backup is." The kitchen staff would be devastated. Then they should probably not find out. She glanced up and caught his eye for just a second, and there it was again, that brief, unguarded smile that she didn't seem entirely aware she was giving. He walked away. He was most of the way back to his office before he noticed he'd been faintly smiling for the last corridor and a half. He stopped, filed it somewhere he was not going to examine, went inside and got back to work. Dinner became a routine. It simply settled into the shape of their days, the way things did when two people were in the same place enough times without resisting it. He was at the head table at 6. She came and sat beside him. The pack moved around them, and after the first week, stopped looking quite so deliberately at the two of them and went back to minding their own evenings, which was as much of a sign of acceptance as Ironridge ever gave. She talked as promised. Not nervously, or maybe the nervous version of her was simply this, words arriving in an easy, continuous stream about whatever she'd seen or thought about or found interesting in the compound that day. He answered when asked and listened when not, and found, somewhere around the third evening, that the listening wasn't something he had to manage. It just happened. She asked him, one evening about a week in, how it had been when Ironridge started. He looked at her. Most people who asked about the founding asked how he had felt, the loss, the grief, the specific weight of being one of 11 who had survived when 84 had not. The battle that had ended his father's pack had been brutal and well documented, the kind of thing that became territory history because it was too large to be only personal. People knew the shape of it. They asked about the inside of it. She hadn't asked that. She had asked how it had been, what it was like to build something in the aftermath of that much loss. "Necessary," he said. "The 11 of us, we were alive and the pack wasn't, and there wasn't really a question about what came next. You keep going. You build something or you don't, and not building seemed like the worse option." She was quiet. She was looking at him with the patient, genuinely interested quality he'd come to recognize in her. She was never performing attention, always actually paying it. "Your father was in the battle," she said. "It wasn't a question." "He led it, he didn't survive it." Dylan looked at his plate. "My mother was here at the compound. She survived the battle itself. She just," he stopped, "found the words or the nearest available version of them. She didn't survive the after." Kiera was still. She didn't say she was sorry, which he was grateful for. He'd heard that enough times over the years that it had stopped meaning anything. She didn't say anything at all for a moment, and the silence had a quality to it that felt like she was simply staying with him in it rather than trying to fill it. "How old were you?" she said finally. 23. She nodded slowly. "The pack you have now," she said, "the way you run it, the healers, the quarterly assessments, the structure of all of it," she paused. "That didn't come from a management philosophy, did it?" He looked at her. "It came from knowing exactly what it looks like when a pack falls apart," she said. Not gently, not hard, just as a thing she was observing, direct and plain. "You built it to be the opposite of that." He held her gaze for a moment. "Yes," he said. She nodded, like that was enough. Like she didn't need him to say more than that, because she already understood the rest. She looked back out at the hall, the noise and warmth of 160 wolves eating their dinner, the specific living quality of a thing that had been built to last, and she said, very simply, "It worked." He didn't say thank you this time. It didn't seem to fit. He just sat with it, and she let him, and they finished their meal in a quiet that felt entirely comfortable for two people who had known each other for just over a week. He walked back to his office afterward and sat at his desk for a while without opening anything. He thought about what she'd said. It came from knowing exactly what it looks like when a pack falls apart. She'd seen it in a moment, not the grief, not the trauma, but the logic underneath the structure he'd built. The reason for the shape of everything. He had never explained it in those terms to anyone. Garrett knew because Garrett had been there. Everyone else either knew the history and kept a respectful distance from it, or didn't know and didn't ask. She'd arrived at it from the outside in 2 minutes, and then she'd said it plainly and moved on. And that was something he was going to sit with for a while. The days that followed had their own shape. She was in the training yard before dawn more mornings than not. He knew this because he ran the compound circuit at first light, and the sounds of the yard reached him, her voice, occasionally, giving corrections to whoever had gotten up early enough to find her there. First it was Mara, then Mara and 2 others. By the 3rd week there were 6 people in her dawn sessions, which she had not announced and had not asked permission for, and he had made the deliberate decision not to unallow something he hadn't been asked about, because the results were visible in the younger warriors, and he was not going to undermine good work on principle. She sat through his briefings. Quiet at first, just listening, he'd noticed that she listened the way she did everything else, fully, turning information over and fitting it into structures only she could see. She asked questions occasionally, good ones, the kind that showed she'd already gone 3 steps past the surface of what had been said. His senior warriors had started answering her without looking at him first to see if that was permitted, which was its own kind of answer. The pack was warming to her. He could see it in the small things, Kale and Lena gravitating toward her in the yard, Rowan stopping to talk to her on his morning circuit, the kitchen staff who had apparently decided she was someone worth feeding well based on no evidence he could identify. She hadn't done anything deliberately to make this happen, which was either the most natural thing in the world or a very sophisticated strategy, and with her he genuinely couldn't tell. He watched all of it. He couldn't help watching. She was, whatever else she was, consistently surprising, and he had not yet run out of things about her that made him have to recalibrate. And yet, he thought about his mother in the evenings sometimes, in the quiet of his office after the compound had gone to sleep. CTLY, the grief was old enough to have worn smooth, but with a specific kind of reflection. His mother had been the social architecture of the pack. The warmth that his father's hardness had made necessary. She had moved through rooms and left people feeling better for her presence, not because she tried to, but because she understood, instinctively, how to make someone feel seen. She had brokered more than one alliance simply by sitting down with the right person and asking the right question in the right tone. She had been, in the truest sense, the heart of the thing. He looked at Kiera, and he saw someone extraordinary. He just wasn't sure yet if extraordinary was the same as right. She was sharp where his mother had been soft, direct where Grace had once smoothed the edges. She would tell you the truth whether or not you were prepared to hear it, and she would do it with the complete absence of cruelty that was somehow more disarming than cruelty would have been. She was going to command respect. She was already commanding it, from people who hadn't planned to give it, but respect was not warmth, and warmth was what a Luna gave a pack. The soft center of a thing with hard edges everywhere else. He thought about the report from the field commanders who'd worked with her at Silvermane. The kill count, the loyalty of her squad, the particular phrase her own captain had put in the commendation. She hasn't lost a wolf under her command. Not one in 4 years. She would have been an extraordinary enforcer. He would have given her a section inside a year without a second thought. He just wasn't sure what to do with the fact that she was here instead, sitting at his table every evening, learning the shape of his pack from the inside out, and looking, if he was honest about it, and he tried to be honest about things more at home every day. He didn't resolve this. He sat with it the way he sat with things that didn't have immediate answers, and he let the time pass, and he kept showing up to dinner at 6 o'clock, and so did she. That, at least, was something he was certain of. Chapter 5. Kiera had always learned names quickly. It was one of those things she'd never thought about until someone pointed it out. Her squad captain at Silvermane, 4 years ago, watching her work a new rotation into the group and calling her out on the fact that she already knew all 8 of them by the end of the first afternoon. It wasn't a skill exactly, more a habit rooted in something she believed without having to think about it. You couldn't care about people you hadn't bothered to see. Names were the first step of seeing someone. Everything else came after. So she learned Ironridge's names. Not strategically, not as a Luna performing her role, just because she was here and these were the people in it, and she wanted to know who they were. The senior warriors first, then the residential wing, then the kitchen staff and the medical unit and the training sections, one conversation at a time, sometimes in corridors and sometimes over meals, and once in the middle of the storage yard, when she'd been looking for Garrett, and found instead an older wolf named Bren who had been with the pack since year 2, and who turned out to have strong opinions about border strategy that she found genuinely useful. The elder members were careful with her. Polite, correct, calling her Luna with a neutrality that was its own kind of assessment. She didn't push on it. She had grown up in a pack, she knew how trust worked, that it was slow and cumulative and couldn't be hurried without breaking, and she was patient about the things worth being patient with. The younger wolves were easier. They were curious the way young people were curious when they hadn't yet decided that curiosity was dangerous, and she knew exactly what to do with that. Answer honestly, ask back, don't perform anything. She'd been doing it with young warriors for 4 years, and the mechanism was the same whether you were their commander or their Luna. Mara had found her on her quater. She appeared in the doorway without knocking, looked at the pack map spread across the desk, and said, "You're the new Luna." "I am," Kiera said. "I'm Mara." "I know, secondary training rotation, Riker's section." Mara blinked, "You know my section." "I've been going through the roster." She nodded at the chair. "Sit down if you want." She sat. She studied Kiera with the direct, unfiltered attention of someone who had decided to find something out and was going the most efficient route. "You wore armor to your own mating ceremony." "I did." "Riker said it was disrespectful." "Riker can think what he likes." Kiera looked back at the map. "What do you think?" A pause, then, with the quality of someone who had actually weighed the word. "Brave. Everyone was talking about it. Some people thought you were making a point." "I was. The point was that I'm a warrior and I was starting as I meant to go on." She glanced up. "Do you fight?" "I'm in training." "Come to the yard tomorrow at dawn. Bring your sparring gear." Mara came. She came the next morning and the morning after that, and within 2 weeks, she'd brought 3 friends and Kiera had an unofficial dawn session running before the main yard opened, which was technically unauthorized, and which she was maintaining on the basis that it hadn't been unauthorized either, and she planned to hold that position as long as it was holdable. The sessions were good. Mara was fast and instinctive with a spatial awareness she didn't fully know she had yet, and watching her develop, it was one of the more satisfying things Kiera had done since she'd arrived. The others were at various stages, but they showed up, which was always the most important thing. Everything started with showing up. It was Mara who noticed things first, because Mara noticed everything. On a morning after the others had gone, wiping down after a drill, she said, "Can I ask you something personal?" "Probably not," Kiera said. "Go ahead." "Do you think the Alpha is handsome?" Kiera put the cloth down. She picked it up again. "That is your personal question." "You went still when he walked into the briefing yesterday. Your hand stopped." "I didn't go still." "You did. You have very expressive hands normally." Mara's face was entirely innocent. "I notice things." The problem was that Mara was right. Kiera had noticed him the moment he came in, the same way she always noticed him, the same way she'd been noticing him since the clearing at the ceremony, the particular quality of his presence in a room, the way everything seemed to settle into alignment when he arrived, like a space coming into focus. It was, she had decided, a purely physical reaction. Her wolf had made certain decisions about Dylan Corvus from the first second, and her body had enthusiastically agreed, and her brain was the only remaining holdout, and her brain was trying. "He's fine," she said, with the finality of someone closing a door. "He runs a good pack. He has strong opinions about where things belong, that's all." Mara looked at her. "You also added 3 minutes to your morning route." "The eastern path is uneven." "It's the same path it's always been." "It's recently become uneven." She gathered her gear. "Sessions over, drills with Riker." "Not for an hour." "Find something useful to do for an hour." She paused at the door. "And Mara." "Yes." "Mind your own business." She could feel Mara's smile on her back all the way down the corridor. It was exactly as infuriating as expected. The dinner routine had become its own quiet thing. 6 o'clock, the common hall, Dylan at the head table. She came and sat beside him, and the pack had stopped making it a thing somewhere around the end of the first week, which she took as a good sign. He was steadying to be around. He didn't perform ease the way some people did, didn't manufacture warmth to fill silence, didn't seem to find her directness something to manage. He just answered what she asked and asked things back, occasionally, and the balance of it was comfortable in a way she hadn't expected. The attraction was a separate, ongoing problem. She had thought, in the early days, that it would ease off. That the initial reaction at the ceremony, the wolf recognition, the specific effect of a very tall, amber-eyed man who moved like he owned the ground he stood on, would settle into something more background level once she was actually living alongside him and the novelty wore off. This had not happened. If anything, the opposite had happened. She knew him better now, knew the dry economy of his humor, and the way he went quiet when something mattered to him, and the particular quality of his attention when he was listening. And knowing him better had not reduced the problem in any way. She handled it the way she handled things she couldn't currently solve. She noted it, put it somewhere out of the way, and focused on what was in front of her. What was less easy to set aside was the question of what he thought of her. Not the Luna assessment, she could read the professional evaluation well enough, had been in enough command structures to know what it looked like when someone was deciding what to do with you. He found her useful, possibly surprising, occasionally more than he'd planned for, which was a familiar experience from both sides. All of that she could work with. What she couldn't quite read was anything else. He looked at her the way he looked at most things, carefully, thoroughly. And she sat with dinner and the morning sessions and the evenings on the wall and wondered, occasionally, whether any of it registered as anything other than an interesting tactical problem. Whether he looked at her the way he looked at the border reports, all strategic value and risk assessment, or whether there was something else in there that she simply couldn't read. She had always been bad at reading controlled people. She suspected he was very attracted to control. She told herself it didn't matter and went back to her morning session and her drills and the steadily expanding list of things she was building here, and mostly she believed it. The day she challenged Riker was the 16th. She hadn't planned it. She'd been watching the senior morning session, still learning how Ironridge ran its training. Riker was running a disarm sequence when she noticed it. The third exchange had a weight distribution problem. In a real fight, it would have cost someone dearly. She watched it 3 times and then, very simply, spoke up. "The third exchange has a problem." Riker froze, the polite blankness of a man weighing how to receive an interruption on his face. "May I?" she asked, stepping forward. He glanced at the group, then back at her. "Go ahead." She ran the exchange at half speed, showing where the weight settled wrong, demonstrating how an opponent could exploit it. Several warriors nodded before she finished. "Full speed?" Riker asked. Translation: "Do you really want to do this?" "Sure." They went for 1 minute and 50 seconds. Mara counted from the fence later with unnerving precision. Riker was skilled, strong, experienced, clever. But the tell she'd spotted in the third exchange was hers. When he repeated the habit, 20 years of muscle memory, she was already there. He went down. The yard was quiet for exactly 1 second, then Kale snorted, someone else laughed, and the spell broke. She offered Riker her hand. He took it, stood, and looked at her for a moment, trying to read whether he was impressed, frustrated, or both. "Third exchange," he said. "Third exchange," she agreed, grinning. "Run it again." "Properly this time," he said, turning back to the group. She ran it for the next 40 minutes, sweat soaking her shirt and a bruise forming on her ribs where he had broken through once in the rematch. She left in the best mood she'd had since leaving Silvermane. She came through the main gate and saw Dylan at the top of the yard steps. He had been there for some portion of it, she didn't know how long. His expression was neutral, unreadable, the same one she'd been trying to crack since the ceremony. "Morning," she said. "Morning," he replied. She glanced at Riker, who was shaking out his shoulders like he'd survived a minor natural disaster. Mission accomplished, her gaze flicked back to Dylan. Neutral, judging, probably wondering what she was thinking. She smirked faintly. Let him stew, not that she cared. She was having far too much fun. The compound had started to feel different. She noticed it gradually. It was Bren stopping her in the eastern yard one morning to tell her what the winter looked like near the northern ridge, which she hadn't asked about but which she needed to know. It was the kitchen staff leaving a pot of tea outside her quarters on cold mornings, which she had not arranged and which no one seemed to have authorized. It was Kale asking her a tactical question in the training yard and then going quiet and saying, "Sorry, I know you're not a trainer," and her saying, "Don't apologize, ask the question," and him asking it and listening to the answer with the specific quality of someone who planned to use what they'd been given. It was Mara, on a Tuesday evening, knocking on her door with no particular reason other than to sit on the floor of her quarters and talk for an hour, which was something Kiera had not had in Silvermane, not for a while, not since she'd made commander, and the rank had put distance between her and the easy kind of friendship. She had not realized, until Mara knocked, how much she had missed it. She thought about Silvermane sometimes, not with the raw grief of the first days, when the plan she'd been building for years had folded away in a council hall, and she'd sat in the dirt behind the storage barn and given herself 5 minutes to feel it. That grief was still there, but it had settled into something quieter, the kind that came with distance. She still thought about the squad she'd left, Finn and the others, the patrol routes she knew by heart, the barracks roof where she'd gone when the world was too much. She still thought about the Alpha title she'd been building toward and everything it would have meant. But she was starting to think about Ironridge too, about the drainage problem in the northeastern ridge that she was apparently the only person to have found, about Mara's footwork improving week on week, about the look on Riker's face when he'd taken her hand after going down, not defeat, but something closer to recognition. She was starting to think about it the way she'd once thought about Silvermane, not as somewhere she'd ended up, but as somewhere she was. She wasn't sure exactly when that had happened. She sat with it one evening on the outer wall, which had become her place in the compound the same way the barracks roof had been her place at home. The high-up quality of it, the view over the territory in the last light of the day, the specific stillness that came from being above the noise. She sat with her back against the stone and looked out at Ironridge settling into evening and asked herself honestly whether she could feel for this place what she had felt for Silvermane. She had thought, when she first arrived, that the answer would be no. That it wasn't possible to love a place you hadn't chosen, to feel the particular loyalty of belonging somewhere that hadn't started as yours. She had expected to be useful here and to be decent about it and to do her job well, but she hadn't expected to feel it. But there was Mara on her floor on Tuesday evenings. There was Bren and his winter knowledge, and the way he'd started saving her a chair at the morning briefings without making it a thing. There was Rowan, the old warrior, who walked the outer circuit every morning and had started timing his route to pass the eastern yard while her dawn session was running, not stopping, just present, the way elders were present when they were approving of something without saying so. There were the young wolves looking at her, with the same specific quality her Silvermane squad had looked at her with once she'd earned it. It wasn't what she'd had. It wasn't Silvermane, her bones were not in this soil, she hadn't grown up inside these walls. But it was real, and it was hers in the way that things you build are yours, and she was starting to think that was enough. Maybe more than enough. She thought, I came here for my old pack. I think I might be staying for this one. The thought arrived quietly, without fanfare, and she sat with it for a while and found she didn't want to argue with it. The full moon fell on the 22nd day. She had known it was coming. She'd read the pack records in her second week, the full moon run, the oldest tradition in Ironridge. Once a month, the pack ran together, moving as one living thing. It cleared away the ordinary day's grit. She understood it instinctively. This is who we are beneath the human part. The part that doesn't lie. For mated pairs, the protocol was to run together. She defiled it away since the ceremony, deal with it when it arrives. It had arrived, they were at the tree line. Time to strip down before the shift. Normal, routine, all part of the pack. And yet, she froze, her pulse ticked up, and she realized she was suddenly very aware of herself. Nakedness had never bothered her before. Not here, not in Silvermane. Not even in the small clearing where Mara and the others had shifted for practice. And yet, seeing Dylan standing there, stripping with that slow, natural ease, the sunlight catching the planes of his shoulders and chest, her stomach dropped and her cheeks heated. She tried to remind herself, it's normal. Everyone does this. He's an alpha, totally professional. Nothing to see here, her eyes betrayed her. She caught a glimpse of him turning, muscles flexing as he undressed, and heat in his amber eyes, a sharp, assessing intensity that made her heart stutter. He wasn't leering, not exactly, but the look was like someone had set a furnace to medium high and aimed it squarely at her. She felt herself go red. Completely human, completely mortal, completely out of control. Her hands fumbled with her own shirt. She reminded herself that the pack did this every month, that this was nothing. But then she caught a flash of his smile, faint, amused, and her wolf, no, her human self, felt like it had just been nudged with a stick of pure fire. She swallowed and shook her head. Focus. The shift. The run. Don't die from mortification before the pack even moves. Even so, she couldn't stop sneaking glances at him, and she suspected he knew it. She could feel it in the way his eyes lingered, in the subtle tilt of his head, the way his posture seemed to fill the space with quiet authority and something more. Something that made her cheeks burn and her heart race, and made the idea of shifting alongside him feel suddenly dangerous in the best possible way. They stripped, shifted, and her muscles rippled into wolf form. The night air smelled sharper, the ground under her paws felt different, sharper, alive. The pack surged forward as one living thing, tails brushing, paws thudding against the frost-hardened earth. She let herself merge with the motion, letting instincts take over. Dylan was beside her almost immediately. Black as a shadow, massive, eyes amber and glowing in the moonlight. His presence hit her in ways she hadn't expected, grounding, thrilling, and a little bit infuriating. Her wolf nudged herself along, playful and daring, brushing against his flank, tail flicking like a cat flicking its tail at someone who really should know better. His wolf pressed back once, deliberately, gently like a question. I see you. Are you enjoying this as much as I am? She pressed again, teasing, letting her wolf twist slightly, tail flicking and shoulder brushing his, a silent challenge. He didn't pull away, didn't even twitch. He just kept pace, immense and controlled. She had to suppress a wolfish laugh when Mara, running slightly ahead, let out a bark-like chuckle at the two of them weaving through the undergrowth like mischievous adolescents. Her wolf leapt over a low ridge, and Dylan's followed perfectly synchronized, as though some unspoken rhythm existed between them now. The absurdity of it, wolves, naked under the moon, her cheeks still heating even in wolf form, made her grin despite herself. At the northern rise, the moon broke through the thinning trees, massive and silver. Dylan's wolf brushed against her side again, just a touch but deliberate. No territory, no dominance, just acknowledgement. Her wolf leaned in, rolling a shoulder into him, brushing tails, letting a hint of mischief show. You're supposed to be terrifying, Alpha, but this is fun. He matched her movements, slow, deliberate teasing back. She felt that strange tangle of exhilaration and heat coil in her chest. Her paws carried her faster, and she pressed again, nudging and brushing against him in a playful rhythm. Her wolf did a little roll on the soft frost, bumping him lightly. Dylan's wolf followed, just enough to keep the silent game alive. She shook her head, letting out a breathless, inward laugh. She was aware, thrilled, and a little embarrassed all at once, and the absurdity of it made her human self flare up even as her wolf purred in delight. They ran the rest of the circuit side by side, wolves intertwined in a silent conversation, her human heartbeat racing in sync with the thudding of her paws. By the time they returned to the tree line and shifted back, panting and flushed, she stumbled slightly, shaking out the shift. Mara appeared at her side with a water bottle, expression carefully neutral. Not a word, Kiera said, knowing full well Mara could read every twitch of her flushed face. I wasn't going to say anything. You were. I was going to offer water, that's all. She drank, looking down at her shaking hands, cheeks hot, still tasting the thrill of heat and play, wolf and human intertwined. Dylan was somewhere nearby. She could feel him through the faint surface bond, a draft of presence she couldn't ignore. Her wolf, now quiet but still alert, nudged her side as if to say, "We'll be doing that again. And I'm not letting you forget it." She went to the wall that evening. Leaning back against the cold stone, she let the darkness and the quiet settle around her, and her mind wandered to the run. To the way Dylan's wolf had pressed against her flank, deliberate but not dominating, and the strange thrill of it, the way it had felt like an acknowledgement, a conversation, and a challenge all at once. Her thoughts drifted to him in human form, always measured, controlled, every movement precise. And then she remembered his wolf, majestic, shadow-dark, and utterly in command, but playful. Mischievous even, rolling with her, nudging her, keeping pace with that quiet, teasing confidence. She couldn't decide whether to laugh or groan at the idea. So this is him, she thought. The same careful, composed man she knew, and yet, beneath it all, a part of him that could play, flirt, and challenge her without a word. She wondered how long it would be before the wolves' private games bled into human space. She imagined him in the training yard, measured and authoritative as always, and then caught a glimpse of his wolf's grin, that subtle teasing spark, and felt a flicker of both anticipation and caution. How much of that side would Dylan allow in human form? How much would she tease out, intentionally or not? Her chest tightened in a curious way, equal parts excitement, worry, and amusement. The wolves had played, and now she and Dylan would have to navigate that new tension, that silent understanding, in ways words alone couldn't define. She felt a flicker of nervous glee at the thought. This is going to be interesting. Her wolf shifted slightly inside her, nudging her hip with quiet satisfaction, as if to say, "I told you." "Keep up," Kiera grinned despite herself. The pack's world had just grown more complicated, more thrilling, and undeniably more hers. She stayed on the wall long after the compound had gone quiet, imagining all the small, unspoken ways the dynamic might change between them now. Playful wolves, careful humans, she had a feeling it wasn't going to be boring. Finally, she went to bed, still smiling to herself, listening to the soft sounds of the pack. She thought, "I am going to have to pay attention." And then she thought, with a shiver of anticipation, "I am not sure careful is even possible anymore." Chapter 6. The morning after the full moon run, Dylan was up before dawn. This was not unusual. What was unusual was that he hadn't slept, and he wasn't going to think about why. So he dressed and went to his office and opened the patrol reports and read the first page twice without taking in a single word. He put it down. He thought about his wolf pressing against her flank on the northern rise. He turned this over with the frustration of a man reviewing a decision he had not made, because it hadn't been a decision, that was the problem. His wolf had simply moved, drawn toward her with the certainty of something that had already chosen, and the worst part was that it had felt effortless. Not like losing control, like doing the obvious thing. He had built 8 years of authority on the careful management of himself and everything around him. He considered, he decided, he acted, in that order, always. His wolf had skipped all 3 steps. He opened the patrol report again. The other problem, the one he was trying to work around, was her wolf. Playful in a way he hadn't expected. That quick teasing quality, the shoulder nudge, the tail flick, the way she'd leaned into him like a challenge and a hello at once. His wolf had responded with an embarrassing lack of dignity. He could not, searching back, remember the last time his wolf had been playful. Control had always been the shape of things, and on a moon run in 40 minutes that shape had become entirely irrelevant. He didn't like that. He was also aware that he'd spent the entire run home with her alongside him, and felt something that had nothing to do with frustration. He closed the patrol report and opened a different one. Garrett appeared at 8 with coffee and the expression of a man collecting credit for not saying something. "The run was good," Garrett said. "It was fine." The pack seemed energized. They usually are after a run. Riker said it was the best circuit he'd seen in years. A pause, said something about the Alpha and Luna on the northern rise. Dylan looked at him. Garrett looked back with the face of a man simply passing along information. She was up at 5 this morning, Eastern Yard, been there 3 hours. Dylan said nothing. I'm just noting, Garrett said, that she also seems energized. He gave Dylan a look that contained about 14 unspoken words, raised his mug, winked, and walked out before Dylan could produce a response. Dylan sat with his coffee. He thought, this is getting complicated. He went back to work because it was the only reliable solution available. The Shadowfin negotiation came up on a Monday. Dylan announced it at the weekly briefing, a border dispute, the kind that required an alpha across the table. He was going Tuesday, back Wednesday, Garrett managing the compound. Standard. He moved to the next item. Garrett cleared his throat. Dylan stopped. Bring her, Garrett said. The room had 5 other people in it. They became very interested in their notes. This is a border dispute, Dylan said. Darius will test every angle he can find. The most visible angle right now is a Luna nobody's met. She's been here less than a month. She mapped your eastern borders in 2 weeks and found a drainage problem your scouts missed. Garrett met his eyes. She'd be useful. Dylan looked around the table. She comes, he said, and moved on. He found her that afternoon in weapons storage, working through an inventory nobody had asked for, moving methodically down the racks with a ledger open on the shelf beside her. There's a negotiation tomorrow, he said from the doorway. Shadowfin, I'd like you to come if you're able. She looked up, of course. It'll be formal, you might want tooth. Something shifted in her face, not quite irritation, but close. I know how to dress for a diplomatic meeting, Dylan. I only meant that if you needed anything from stores. I don't, she went back to the ledger, first light. Yes, 2 days. I'll be there. He left. He didn't say anything else, because there was nothing else that would help, and he'd already said the wrong thing once. She was at the car before him. He came out at first light and she was already there, leaning against the passenger's side with her pack at her feet and a travel mug in each hand, her hair loose for the first time he'd seen it. He was used to it braided back. Down, it fell past her shoulders in dark waves slightly wild from sleep, and she was in a charcoal jacket that fit her well, and he stopped that thought before it finished and went to take the mug she was holding out. Coffee, she said. Made too, black, you always take it black. He took it, he hadn't told her that. Something shifted in his chest, quiet and warm. He didn't say anything about it. He just drank his coffee. Garrett, seeing them off, was having an internal experience he was containing with visible effort. Safe drive, he managed, and went back inside. The first stretch of road was quiet. She looked out the window and sipped her coffee and didn't seem to need anything from the silence, which he appreciated. The roads into Shadowfin's territory were rougher than Ironridge's, older, and he navigated without the map. She opened the bag at her feet after a while and produced sandwiches, an apple, and a bag of trail mix with gummy bears visible through the packaging. He looked at the gummy bears. Don't, she said. I wasn't going to say anything. You were looking at them judgmentally. I don't have a judgmental look. You have about 4, that was the mild one. She held out a sandwich. Beef or beef, I wasn't sure what you liked, so I made the same thing twice. You made these? He took the sandwich, genuinely caught off guard. He bit into it and stopped. It was good, properly seasoned, something warm in it he couldn't place. Better than the compound kitchen on its best day. This morning, she said, couldn't sleep. He ate and said nothing, and thought about her up before dawn in the compound kitchen, and about his wolf on the northern rise, and let the two thoughts sit next to each other. After a while he said, Darius, the Shadowfen Alpha. He runs negotiations like a waiting game. He gives the other side room and watches what they do with it. What does he actually want? The water access or the eastern boundary? Dylan looked at her sideways. Water access, the boundary is leverage. So he'll open with the boundary to see if we panic. Yes. And if we don't? Then he knows we know, which changes what he'll accept. She was quiet for a moment. Does he need to feel like he won something, or can he take a hard no? He needs it to feel like a negotiation, not a concession. So we give him something that costs us nothing, but looks like movement. Correct. She looked back out the window. I'll watch how you open it. I won't say anything unless I see something useful. He glanced at her. She was already looking at the road. They were quiet for a stretch. Then she said, without setup, I think my wolf likes you. He turned to look at her. She was still watching the window, but the corner of her mouth was doing something. She made her feelings pretty clear on the run. I thought you should know, since it's your wolf she was making them clear to. He looked back at the road. He sat with the straightforwardness of it, no preamble, no strategy, just, here is a true thing. My wolf likes your wolf, he said. She looked at him. He kept his eyes on the road and felt her looking. That's the most you've said about feelings since I arrived, she said. It's accurate. It is, she said, and he could hear the smile in it without seeing it, and something in his chest did the quiet, warm thing again. They drove the rest of the way without talking, and it was comfortable. Darius was already at the meeting lodge. He was in his 60s, broad-shouldered, with the patience of a man who had done this many times and stopped finding it tiring. He shook Dylan's hand, then he looked at Kiera. He looked at her slowly, taking his time. You're Luna, he said. Kiera, she said, and offered her hand without hesitation. He shook it, something shifted in his face fractionally. They sat. The first hour belonged to Dylan. He laid out Ironridge's position on the boundary, clean, documented, giving Darius exactly enough and not one detail more. He knew the rhythm of these things. Darius listened, counterpositioned with equal precision, and they went back and forth in the measured way of two people who had done this long enough to know what the first hour was for. Kiera sat to Dylan's right and said nothing. Dylan watched Darius notice this and decide what it meant. Then Darius turned to her. You've been at Ironridge, what, a month? 5 weeks, she said. And you find it agreeable? I find it well run. She picked up her water. The documentation on the eastern boundary goes back further than yours does, 40 years further. Dylan was too polite to lead with that. Darius glanced at Dylan. Dylan kept his expression even. Is that so? Darius said. I can show you. She opened the folder she'd brought and slid 3 pages across the table, historical survey records, original boundary markers, a map overlay Dylan had not seen before. From the Regional Authority Archive. Dylan had it pulled before the meeting. She had not told him she'd done that. Darius looked at the pages, his expression recalibrated. The water access, he said, pivoting, is the more pressing matter. I agree, Dylan said, and brought the conversation back to his ground. They went another 2 hours. Darius was skilled, patient, indirect, probing every position for give. Dylan gave him nothing he hadn't decided to give, moved when it was time and held firm when it wasn't. He'd done this long enough that it felt less like negotiation than conversation, and he was good at both. When Darius made his final push on the water access boundary, Dylan let him finish and then said, the seasonal flow data puts the primary source in our watershed 8 months out of 12. We can agree on shared access protocols for the remaining 4. That gives Shadowfen what it needs without creating a precedent either of us wants. Darius looked at the table, at Dylan, then briefly at Kiera, who was considering something in the middle distance. Acceptable, he said. He walked them out. At the door, he held Kiera's hand a moment longer than protocol required. Ironridge is fortunate, he said. She looked mildly surprised. Thank you. He nodded at Dylan and went back inside. They walked to the car. She stood at the passenger side, looking at the lodge. You pulled the archive records, she said. Before the meeting. You didn't tell me. I thought it might come up. He opened his door. You had the same thought. She looked at him over the roof of the car. Then she got in. The lodge for the overnight was one main room, a fireplace, 2 narrow beds. She took the left without discussion. He took the right. He was at the small table going through the afternoon's documents when she came out of the bathroom changed for sleep, a soft, worn shirt, hair down, and sat cross-legged on the bed, and began undoing the arrangement she'd put her hair in for the meeting. Working through it, the way she did things she'd done 1,000 times. He went back to the documents. You were good today, he said. He hadn't planned to say it. She paused with her hands in her hair. Thank you. She was quiet. She pulled the last pin and ran her fingers through, and her hair fell loose. Can I ask you something? She said. Go ahead. Your father, was he the one who taught you to negotiate? He set the document down. He taught me the shape of it, the patience, how to read what someone actually wants underneath what they're saying. He paused. The rest I learned on my own, some of his methods I didn't keep. One's based on leverage. Yes, she nodded, quiet for a moment. And your mother, how did she handle people? Dylan considered this. Differently, she didn't negotiate. My mother, she had a knack for people. She wasn't loud or forceful, soft, really, but just being in her presence made others calmer, more willing to see possibilities they hadn't before. Somehow, that quiet confidence shaped negotiations more than any words or tactics could. That's what I admired. That's what made her her. Kiera pulled her knees up. Was that what you had in mind? For Aluna, he was quiet long enough that silence answered for him. Yes, he said finally, something like that. And I'm not that. No, I know, she looked at the fire. I'm not going to apologize for it. I'm not asking you to. He set the rest of the documents aside. I was asking for the wrong thing. I think I knew that before you arrived and hadn't caught up yet. She watched the flames, shadows flickering across her face. There was something about firelight softer, less managed than the training yard that made her seem different. Is that your version of saying you were wrong? She asked. It is. It's very careful. I'm a careful person. I've noticed. The corner of her mouth lifted. For what it's worth, I think your pack might need someone like me just as much. He met her gaze steadily. I think you're right. She held his gaze a moment longer than she usually held anything, then looked back at the fire. Good, she said quietly. That's good. He sat at the table after she fell asleep, fire low, room quiet. At some point he got up to add wood and stood looking at her, turned toward the wall, sleeping the way she did everything, completely committed. He draped his spare shirt over her earlier without thinking much about it, the room being cold. He thought about it now. He went to bed and lay in the dark listening to the fire settle, and thought about a number of things, and eventually slept. She woke before him in the morning. He became aware of her moving quietly around the room and lay still with his eyes almost open and listened. She had the shirt. He could see her in the gray morning light look down at it, something private in her face, something she was sitting with and not resolving quickly. Then she folded it carefully, set it on the chair, and started getting ready. They ate breakfast at the small table. She'd found bread and eggs in the provision box and made something quick and good without making anything of it, and drove back in the morning light without much conversation. Somewhere on the road home, he pulled over, reached into the back seat, and dropped his jacket into her lap. She put it on without comment and looked out the window, and he drove, and neither of them said anything, and by the time they reached the compound, Gates the jacket smelled like both of them. Chapter 7. Back at the compound, she went straight to the eastern yard. He'd seen her cross the main yard still in road clothes, pack over one shoulder, and change direction toward training without breaking stride. He went to his office and worked through what had accumulated in 2 days. Later, passing the yard, she was running a sequence with Mara and 3 of the younger wolves, and she looked settled, like the yard had been hers for years. He went back to work. She returned his shirt the next morning. He found it on the table inside his office door, folded. No note. He picked it up and held it for a moment. It still carried her scent, then set it on the chair. He didn't bring it up, neither did she. It became one of those things. Mara found him near the supply room that afternoon with the expression of someone who had been given information and was deciding how to use it. "Kale told me," she said, "that Kiera was wearing your jacket when you got back from Shadowfen. It was cold on the drive." She clasped her hands. "She also had your shirt this morning." "She was cold at the lodge." "You seem very aware of her temperature." He looked at her for a long moment. She looked back, entirely earnest. "Mara." "Yes, Alpha." "Riker's section, drill schedule, go." She went. The smile didn't leave until she turned the corner. He couldn't sleep that night. He didn't go to the wall, that was her place, and it wasn't his to crowd. He went to the private training room off the war wing and picked up the practice staff, because movement was the thing that worked when his head wouldn't quiet. He was 30 minutes in when the door opened. She didn't stop moving either. She was mid-sequence, something fluid he hadn't seen her run before, and she finished it before she acknowledged him. "Can't sleep," she said. "No." He kept the staff. She had the short blade she brought to everything. He went back to his side, and they worked separately, and it was quiet between them the way it was quiet when there was nothing left to pretend with silence. After a while he said, "Show me the disarm, the setup from the second round with Riker." "Better with a partner." "I'm here." She came to the center. He put the staff down and crossed to her, and they ran through it, her offensive, him receiving. She walked him through the weight shift and the angle. He followed, adjusted. She ran it at half speed. He blocked it correctly. Again. She ran it differently. He read the change and moved differently. She recalculated and came with the variation, and he had to move fast to catch it, and his arm came around to secure the hold, and she turned to break it, and they ended up somewhere the technique hadn't planned, his arm along her back, her shoulder against his chest, no gap left between them. Neither of them moved. He could feel her warmth through his shirt, the slight shift in her breathing, and the shift in his. She looked up. He was already looking at her. Her eyes were dark and her mouth was close, and she was completely still in his arm, and his wolf was offering no useful guidance whatsoever. "Dylan," she said, very quiet. "Kiera." She turned into his grip instead of breaking out of it. Then he kissed her. His hand came up to the back of her neck, and she kissed him back with everything she had. And it turned out managing this down for 2 months had the same effect on her that it had on him, and for a while neither of them was thinking about the technique. When they broke apart, they were both breathing hard. His forehead dropped to hers. His thumb was moving against the back of her neck without him deciding to do that. "That wasn't the disarm," she said. "No." She laughed, short and involuntary, and he breathed out against her hair, and the exhale had nothing controlled in it, and she stepped back just enough to have her feet under her. He let her, he didn't reach. She looked at him for a moment. "I should sleep," she said. "Yes." "Good night, Dylan." "Good night." She went. He stayed on the bench for a while with his elbows on his knees, looking at the floor. He went to bed and lay in the dark thinking about the sound of her laugh and the way she had turned into his grip instead of out of it, and he thought, I need to stop calling this something else. He wasn't ready to say what it was, but he stopped pretending the categories were holding. Chapter 8. She came to his office a few evenings later, the corridors quiet around her, her footsteps measured. Her chest felt tight in a way it hadn't before, a nervous excitement she tried to mask with careful composure. She wanted to ask him something about the Eastern rotation, but that was only her excuse. He hadn't been expecting her. She noticed the slight lift of his brow, the pause in his reading, but she didn't let it stop her. Come in, he said, and she stepped inside, letting her presence fill the doorway, slow and deliberate. Evening clothes, no blade, hair loose. This was not the Kiera who trained at dawn. This was her, fully herself, and she knew it would make a difference. She let her eyes drift across his office, cataloging like she always did, though today it was a subtle cover. Her hands grazed the map as she laid it out, tilting it toward herself, and she caught the way he leaned over it. She felt the tiny thrill of his attention, and she fed it, speaking steadily, keeping her hands on the paper, letting him see her thoughts unfold. The third-week patrol, she began, pointing at the low ground near the ridge, the route cuts through here. If we move the start point here, the timing works better with the drainage. She watched him lean in. He didn't dismiss her. He examined it, and she saw the approval flicker in his eyes, a quiet acknowledgement that he'd been blind to the perspective she could offer. She let herself feel a small surge of satisfaction, but she didn't stop there. She tapped the map, tracing lines and bends. Also, there's a sightline problem at this bend, and then she noticed it. He wasn't looking at the map anymore. His gaze lingered on her mouth on her, and she felt herself go still, a shiver she couldn't hide. Her hands hovered over the paper for a fraction too long, as if pausing might slow the pull between them. She had come here to talk rotations, but the rotations weren't what mattered anymore. The rotation, she said, trying to regain control. Yes, he replied, but his voice had changed. Softer, more intimate, almost hesitant. I should probably stay, he said, quieter than she expected. She caught the almost self in it, the voice he didn't mean to make audible. She hesitated, weighing her options, and then she let herself because she wanted to see how far she could pull him in. She stayed. He reached across the desk, taking her hand, and she felt the warmth of him through her gloves, through her skin. She moved toward him, letting the pull guide her, pressing herself against the certainty in him. She kissed him slowly, savoring the moment, feeling how solid and sure he was. Her hands roamed his chest, testing the strength beneath the surface, pressing in just enough to claim space. She felt the shift in him, the careful distance he'd kept, melting away under her presence. She teased him lightly, letting her lips brush his as she murmured against his mouth. For the record, I reserve the right to be annoyed about how long this took. You could have said something. So could you? She shot back, enjoying the small power of it, feeling the slow smile she couldn't see but knew was there. The kiss deepened. She guided him, letting herself explore what she had wanted for weeks, tracing the line of his jaw, the curve of his shoulder. She leaned into him, pulling him toward the couch without breaking contact, letting herself luxuriate in the sensation of being entirely herself with him. She wanted him to feel it all, the warmth, the pull, the impossibility of remaining careful. When it was over, she lay with her head on his chest, breathing slowing, listening to the rhythm of him as he listened to her. There was no conversation. No words could capture the quiet intimacy, the exchange that had passed between them, an acknowledgement of something neither had said aloud but both understood. She pressed a brief, precise kiss to the corner of his jaw before leaving. Just that, a signature, a small mark that was hers alone. And then she was gone. She walked away with the faintest thrill of triumph. She had gotten through to him. She had softened the edge he kept against the world, and she knew, somewhere deep in her chest, that he had noticed. The weeks that followed were a careful dance. She moved through the compound with purpose, letting her competence speak, quietly shaping things around her. The patrol schedules, the dawn sessions, the youngest warriors' routines, she inserted herself without announcing it, watching him notice things she knew he would. She liked the way he observed her, a mix of grudging approval and fascination. She liked seeing him softened, even in the smallest ways. She remembered Kale's birthday, waking at 4 to bake a cake, organizing dinner for the common room. She watched him watch her, or she imagined he did, and felt the subtle satisfaction of pulling him into the life of the pack without needing acknowledgement. She did things for them quietly, letting her actions speak. She had noticed the small changes in him, the way he looked at her differently, the way he recognized her influence without words. During the morning drills, she found herself watching him. Not the other warriors, not the exercises, him. His posture, the way he moved, the care he took. She caught his glance and turned away, composed as always, but a small smile tugged at her lips. She could see the moment he realized, perhaps for the first time, that she wasn't just observing. She was here fully, and she was moving him. She liked that, and she knew, without a doubt, that he knew. Chapter 9. The next full moon was a week away, and neither of them had mentioned it. Dylan found her on the wall 2 evenings before, sitting the way she did when something hadn't settled in her chest, rigid, eyes on the territory, not fully present. He had learned the difference. He sat beside her. She handed him her tea without looking. He took it. "That's mine," she said. "You handed it to me." Conditionally. He drank, and she watched him, the tilt of his head, the way his fingers tightened around the cup. She felt the familiar pull, the heat that rose in her stomach when she had him so near. Her pulse quickened with the thought of being this close, of having the chance to make him soft. "The last run," she said eventually. "Yes." My wolf was. Her gaze slid to the horizon. "I don't always have full control over her when we shift." "I know," he said, looking at her profile. "Neither do I." Her eyes flicked to him, searching. He met her gaze and held it. "You," she said softly, "don't have control." "My wolf pressed against yours on the northern rise before I made any decision about it," he said. "So? No, not with you." She let herself smile. That clarity, the restraint he didn't even try to hide, made her shiver. She leaned a fraction closer, letting him feel it. "That must be annoying," she said, teasing, letting the word hang. "It's the most annoying thing that's ever happened to me," he replied, and she laughed, short, real, unpracticed, and felt the tiny thrill of power in making him that honest. "She liked it," she said. "My wolf. She liked running with yours. She'll want to again." "Mine also, without question." She let her eyes roam him, slow, calculating, feeling the subtle softness in his posture he couldn't hide, letting herself imagine what she might coax from him tonight. "So we're letting our wolves decide things for us?" she asked. "We're acknowledging the decisions are already made," he said. That certainty made her chest tight. She leaned back against the stone, anticipation coiling in her. The full moon rose clear and cold. The pack gathered at the southern clearing, fires at the edges, the long table, voices low but excited, a weight of anticipation that carried through the night. Dylan arrived and froze. She was already there, standing near the fire circle, hair loose, brushing her shoulders and spine, every subtle movement lit by firelight. Her skin glimmered in the glow, the delicate curve of her neck, the slope of her shoulder, the hollow beneath her collarbone. Every line of her body screamed him, beckoned him, his chest tightened. The pull in his groin, in his chest, in the pit of his stomach was unmistakable. He had spent months skirting this, pretending it wasn't there, pretending he could remain detached. But the sight of her, bare and unshielded, made every pretense collapse. She belonged here, yes, but also, he realized, she belonged to him. He wanted her, all of her. He carried a plate from the table and held it toward her, but he barely registered the motion. She took it, fingertips brushing his. That small contact sent heat pooling low in him. He felt the possessive surge, a want so sharp it was nearly physical. He wanted to wrap her in his arms, cover her body with his hands, press her close, let her smell like him, mark her in ways she hadn't even imagined yet. He wanted to make her his in every sense, like she already was in his heart. Her eyes flicked toward him briefly, composed, unreadable, but he knew better. She felt it too. The tension between them was thick enough to taste. "Ready?" he asked softly. "For which part?" she teased, letting her voice trail with that hint of heat that always drew him closer. He gave her a sidelong glance. The wolf inside him twitched, straining, sensing the unspoken need coiled in her muscles, in her posture, in the curve of her hips. "Yes," she said. The word was flat, controlled, but he could feel the pulse beneath it, fast, alert, and entirely hers. Every instinct in him screamed, "Claim her." As the pack began to strip and shift, Dylan felt a shiver of anticipation and something deeper, possessiveness. His eyes followed her every motion, slow and deliberate. Every inch of skin revealed made him want to bury himself in her, hold her, mark her, cover her in his scent. He could imagine the heat of his hands over her back, her sides, the warmth of her body pressed against him, every part of her responding to him in ways that made him ache. When she stepped toward the designated rock to shift, he felt it, the need to stop her, cover her, take her, claim her. His wolf pressed against him in silent agreement, urging him toward the same things he had denied for too long. But he restrained himself, letting desire coil like a spring, savoring the sight of her, naked and free, completely hers, yet entirely his. She moved with perfect confidence, shedding the last layer, letting the shift consume her. Dylan's chest tightened, groin straining with want, every nerve ending alive. He wanted to touch her, run his hands along the curve of her spine, pull her close, and mark her in ways she would feel long after the night ended. Possessiveness twisted with desire. He imagined the way she smelled after wearing his jacket, pressed to his chest, and the thought drove him wild. He wanted that again, but now with her skin bare, with her pulse under his hands. When she crossed the clearing to him, she didn't hesitate. Forehead to forehead, nose brushing his, breath mingling. He felt the wolf in him stir, the human in him ache, and both of them recognized what was theirs. He could smell her, taste the heat in the air around her, feel the tension she radiated, and it consumed him. He wanted her entirely, wanted to feel her press into him, wanted to claim her for himself in the unspoken, infinite ways he'd imagined. They shifted, wolf and human, and ran together. The forest opened around them, but he felt only her. Every movement of her body in sync with his was a thrill, a confirmation, a spark of wild, tetherless desire. He pressed close when the wolves ran alongside, letting her feel the tension he couldn't hide, the need that burned low and hot. Every gentle nudge from her, every glance, every touch of fur and skin made him ache with want. He wanted to bend her, mark her, take her in ways she couldn't resist. Possession mingled with desire, and he let both taste the thrill of the hunt. Deep in the northern trees, she bit him lightly at the base of his neck. Heat shot straight through him, molten and fast. He returned it, teeth grazing the curve of her neck, deliberate, intimate. The wolf pressed against him, shivering in satisfaction. He wanted to do more, pull her down, cover her, mark her scent, taste her, feel every inch of her respond to him. The ache was physical, sharp, undeniable. They lingered there, letting the world blur, wolves and humans intertwined, desire and possession fused in silence. Back at the clearing, human form returned, sweat clinging to them both. She stepped closer than the pack demanded, closer than decorum allowed. Loose hair falling, eyes bright with firelight, skin warm from exertion, pulse fast. He couldn't look away. Every inch of her made him ache to cover her, to hold her, to claim her. "The pack is watching," she said softly. "They always do," he said, thumb brushing along her jaw. She leaned into it, letting him feel her heat, letting him taste the want that mirrored his own. He wanted her pressed fully against him, naked in his arms, marking her skin with hands and mouth, just as she wore his jacket and smelled like him. Possessiveness roared through him, and he wanted to bend her into him, remind her who she was to him. "You bit me in the forest," he murmured. "My wolf bit you," she whispered back. "Your wolf is you," he said. "Yes," she breathed. "And yours bit back," he said softly, letting the memory of teeth grazing her skin make him shiver, make him ache with want. His hands itched to roam her body, to feel her react under him, to wrap her in his heat, let her smell him, taste him, feel the possessiveness in every stroke. He wanted to mark her, claim her, feel her body pressed into his in the way he imagined for months. "Later," he said, voice low and rough. "Later," she replied, voice warm, promising, aware. Later, after the fires burned low and the pack dispersed, she came to his quarters. Dylan opened the door, closing it behind her, the air thick with residual heat of the run and the tension lingering between them. He didn't wait. He kissed her, slow, heavy, deliberate. His hands moved over her back, waist, the curve of her hips, tracing the skin he had wanted to feel for months. She pressed into him, pulling him closer, letting him take what he wanted, guiding him as she always had, letting him claim her. He drew her to the bed, letting her settle in his lap, pressing her fully to him, skin to skin, heat to heat. His hands roamed her body with reverence and want, tracing every curve, every line, every hollow that made her hers and his. He kissed her shoulder, collarbone, the side of her neck where her wolf had marked him, pressing into her with the intensity he'd restrained for too long. She pressed to him, mouth to his shoulder, letting him taste her heat, marking him in turn. Dylan groaned low, possessive, aching, and pressed her tighter, letting himself feel the fullness of what he wanted. Her entirely his here now. When they finally lay together, her head on his chest, fingers tangled in his hair, he allowed himself to relax. Every inch of him wanted to claim her, keep her, mark her, but he let himself savor her, the heat of her, the scent of her, the truth that she was his in ways that went deeper than physical. "Stay," he whispered into her hair. She hesitated, letting desire and anticipation play across her body, then murmured, "All right." She let herself be enveloped, letting him mark her in all the ways he had wanted, with touch, heat, and the promise of ownership, without ever needing to speak it aloud. He closed his eyes, feeling the weight of months of denial melt into this moment, letting her warmth and her scent fill the space he'd imagined for so long. His wolf curled around them both, satisfied, and he knew she was his. Fully undeniably, and he would never let her slip away. She was gone when he woke, the empty bed a hollow reminder of what she gave and took from him. His hand reached for her, finding only warmth that lingered, and the wolf in him grumbled its discontent. Dylan dressed slowly, letting the memory of her press against him linger. He went to his office, carrying her absence like a weight. Garrett arrived, coffee in hand, expression knowing. "The pack is talking," he said. "I assumed," Dylan replied. "Riker said it was the best run he's ever witnessed, quite specific about why." "He's sentimental," Dylan muttered. "She bit you," Garrett said, "and you bit her back." "My wolf," Dylan, Garrett interrupted. "You and your wolf are the same person." Dylan looked down. He had been watching her, feeling her influence, letting her soften him. He had understood it all along, but had only realized it fully now. "You're in love with her," Garrett said. "I know." He went to find her. She was in the yard, teaching with her usual calm authority. When she saw him, the flicker of heat and mischief on her face made his chest tight. "Can we talk this evening?" he asked. "The wall," she said. That evening, she was there, back against the stone, the sunset painting her in gold and shadow. She felt the warmth of the fading light on her shoulders and the quiet pull of the evening around her. When he sat close, she didn't look at him at first, letting her gaze drift over the horizon, over the forest, over the territory they both knew so well. She handed him the tea, deliberately slow, letting the small gesture carry a weight she couldn't quite name. When their fingers brushed, a spark went straight through her, and she let herself notice it. He didn't rush. He just settled beside her, presence radiating something solid, something safe, and something that made her pulse go sharp in her chest. "I didn't like waking up alone this morning," he said softly. Her chest tightened. She kept looking at the horizon, pretending to study the colors, but she felt the honesty behind his words like a weight settling over her. The space between them wasn't empty, it was taut, full of all the things neither had said, full of anticipation, desire, and the quiet ache of months of watching him, wanting him, knowing him. "I asked you to stay," he continued. "You said you would, and then you were gone before I woke." His voice held the truth of it, simple and unyielding. "I'm not complaining, I'm telling you," she swallowed. She didn't need to answer yet. She let the tension stretch between them, letting herself feel it, letting it coil and settle at the base of her stomach. She could feel the steady thrum of his presence next to her, the weight of him, the way he grounded her even as he stirred something else, something raw, unclaimed, dangerous in the best way. "I didn't know if you wanted me there," she said finally. "I do, always," he said, her chest rose with the truth of it. She turned toward him, letting herself really look, letting herself feel the want and care in his eyes. Letting herself know that she had been right all along, he felt the same. Her lips parted slightly, and for the first time in weeks she let herself relax into the certainty of him. "I love you," he said, her throat caught. A dozen emotions ran across her face at once, some she didn't even try to name. And then she let herself smile, real, involuntary, warm, something that belonged to him now. The kind of smile that made her pulse beat faster and her skin tingle where his shoulder brushed hers. "You're supposed to be bad at feelings," she teased, letting a hint of mischief slide through the tension. "I am. It just took me too long," he said, and she caught that brief flash of vulnerability that made her ache for him all over again. She laughed, short, real, the kind of laugh that belonged only to him now. She felt it vibrate in her chest, felt the way he seemed to absorb it, smile at it, let it linger between them. "I've been in love with you for at least a month," she admitted, letting the words spill out in fragments of honesty and frustration. "And I've been furious about it." "I know," he said softly, and warmth spread through her chest at the calm certainty in his voice. "You knew, I've been watching you," he said. "I know when you're furious." Her finger jabbed at him, light but deliberate. Very smug for a man who took months. "I am sorry," he said, "but I will make up for it." She stared at him, trying to measure how much he meant, but there it was in his eyes, truth, certainty, fire. Her hand rose slowly, almost of its own volition, and found his jaw. The warmth of his skin under her fingertips made her pulse race. She guided him toward her, leaned in, and let the kiss happen, slow, full, everything between them bare. The compound below settled into night. The forest around them darkened, shadows pooling in the folds of the hills. The moon rose over the trees, silver light painting everything in sharp, quiet lines. "We have things to figure out," she said softly, leaning slightly into him. "Yes," he replied, steady, grounding her in the weight of his presence. "I'm going to argue with you. I'd be worried if you didn't. I'm going to be right often." "You are," he said, and she felt the teasing warmth in his voice. "But that's different from winning." She leaned into him, letting the fabric of his jacket slip around her shoulders. She pressed closer, letting herself be wrapped in it, letting his scent fill her senses, letting the memory of him, of this moment, of all the moments they'd shared, cling to her skin like fire. The fit was perfect, inevitable, the culmination of months of tension, want, and unspoken desire. Every small brush, every subtle contact of their bodies said what words could not. No words were needed. No more explanations. She pressed into him, letting herself feel him as much as he felt her. They were aligned now, for the first time truly, completely, and she allowed herself to smile against the pressure of him, knowing they had finally crossed the line they'd been skirting for months. It meant what it meant, and it was theirs. Chapter 10. She woke before him, which was the way of things now. The room was gray with early light, his arm heavy across her waist, his breath slow and even against the back of her neck. She lay still and let herself feel it, the warmth of him, the quiet compound outside, the bond humming in her chest like something alive. She had been waking in his bed for 2 months. It still caught her sometimes, in the soft moment before she was fully herself, the specific luxury of his arm, his scent on the sheets, the way the room felt inhabited in a way her own quarters never had. She was a person who had learned early to be careful with softness. She had not expected this. She had not expected any of this. She turned carefully. She'd learned to do it without waking him. He slept deeper when she was there, which she had decided to find satisfying. In the gray light, she looked at him. The managed quality entirely gone in sleep. Just a man, dark-haired, warm, the line of his jaw less set than it was in the compound. She knew this face. The crease at the corner of his mouth when he was trying not to smile. The look he had when he was solving something and didn't want to show it. The particular quality of his attention when he watched her across the training yard, thorough, unhurried, the same attention he gave everything he'd decided mattered. She knew she mattered to him. She put her hand to his face without deciding to, his jaw under her palm, the faint morning roughness. His eyes opened. He looked at her with the expression that was only ever hers in the early dark. She leaned down and kissed him, slow and certain, and he responded the way he always did, fully, with everything, no half measures, and she felt the bond warm between them and thought, "I could do this every morning for the rest of my life." She was still thinking about staying when the knock came, 3 sharp strikes. An urgency knock, the kind that meant something had changed. Dylan was already upright, years of alpha instinct moving him before she'd finished registering the sound. She was a second behind him. By the time he had the outer door open, she was at his shoulder, and Cale stood on the threshold, pale under his composure. "Intelligence report," he said. "You need to see this." They looked at each other. The warmth of the morning was still on her skin. His hand was at the small of her back. "Give us 2 minutes," Dylan said, and closed the door. The intelligence had been building for 2 weeks. A rogue alpha, name of Valdez, consolidating territory 3 packs east. Rogue alphas moved and absorbed with some regularity. Dylan had read the early reports and filed them. He did not file this one, 212 wolves. 4 packs forcibly absorbed. Each neutralized cleanly, alpha lines cut, wolves folded in without the usual chaos of forced mergers. This was not opportunism. This was a plan, and the plan was pointed at Ironridge. He called a war council for that afternoon. Kiera was already at the table, the southern map open in front of her, charcoal marks connecting in a line that required no interpretation. "He's building a corridor," she said, without looking up. He stood beside her and looked at the marks. The logic was clean. He might have seen it himself in another day. She had seen it before he'd asked. "How long?" he said. "A month. 6 weeks at the outside." The senior warriors arrived, and Dylan briefed them and watched the weight of it settle on the room, not panic, but the specific reckoning of people who had known this day existed and were now in it. Kiera waited for the initial assessment before she spoke. She had learned the rhythm of his counsels, he had watched her learn it across months, the way she learned everything, quietly, attentively, without making a show of it. He comes from the east, she said. The northern approach is exposed. The western terrain gives us too much defensive advantage, he'll have scouted that. He comes from the east because the tree coverage lets him stage and the approach conceals numbers. She looked at Dylan. He nodded. Which means the eastern wall needs to be our strongest position, not our thinnest. The redeployment argument with Riker went as she predicted. She handled it the way she handled everything she was certain about, directly, without apology, without aggression. Factual. By the time the room had caught up with her reasoning, Riker was making the face he made when his own calculation came out somewhere he hadn't expected. The secondary tier has improved, Riker said. Significantly, she said. Not gloating, the War Council ran 3 hours and produced something better than what any of them had come in with, and when the room cleared, she stayed. He was rolling up the territorial map. She was looking at the eastern wall diagram she'd sketched, charcoal on her fingers. How long do you think we have? She said. A month. 6 weeks at most. She nodded. Then, I want to run the eastern training myself. Full days, next 4 weeks. I know that terrain better than anyone except you. I know the approach lines, I know where our fighters are strongest. I want to build those defensive units myself. He set the map down, and that was when it started, the thing beneath his ribs, the thing with teeth. No, not a thought. Older than thought. His wolf surging up like a wave against the back of his sternum, sudden and absolute, and he had to hold himself very still for a moment because the force of it surprised him even now, 4 months in. No, not the eastern wall. Not the most exposed position in the engagement. Not her. He heard what she was asking. He also heard what she wasn't saying. She wasn't asking to be given something. She was telling him what needed doing and who needed to do it. She had done this since the first week. Walked his borders, found his drainage problem, revised his supply ledger, cataloged his weapons stores. She had been building this pack's defenses since she arrived, and now she was telling him she was the right person to put on the hardest line. She was right. He knew she was right. He had known it before she'd finished the sentence, and it was the worst thing about it. He stood with it, just for a moment. The war room, empty now except for them, and the territory map half-rolled under his hands, and Kiera looking at her eastern wall diagram with charcoal on her fingers like she'd already claimed the thing and was working out the details. He thought about the first time he'd seen her. The altar. The bonding ceremony she'd walked into in full armor, her colors across her chest, her weapons at her hip, not because she was defiant, but because that was simply what she was. She had not dressed herself for the occasion. She had come as herself, and herself was a warrior, and the first thought he'd had when he'd seen her across that altar hadn't been the careful assessment of an alpha meeting a politically necessary match. He had watched her across 4 months, and he had seen exactly what she was, the mind, the precision, the way she moved through a problem without vanity or hesitation. He had watched her learn his wolves' names in the first week and know their fighting styles by the second. He had stood at the eastern yard wall and watched her run drills and felt something in his chest that was not a comfortable thing to feel, because it was pride. It was pride so thorough it almost knocked him sideways, and underneath it always the other thing. She is extraordinary and she belongs on the front line, and I am terrified. Those two truths existed inside him simultaneously. He had not found a way to resolve them, and he had stopped trying. All right, he said. She looked up. Just like that. He held her gaze. You know the terrain, you know those wolves, you're the right person for it. A pause, 1 beat, because he was going to say this honestly, and it needed saying honestly. Just like that. She looked at him for a moment with the unguarded expression, the one she sometimes forgot, and something moved across her face that he didn't try to name. Then she nodded and picked up her diagram and went. He stood in the empty war room. His wolf was not settled. His wolf would not be settled. It paced somewhere behind his ribs with the low, relentless energy of something that had been told no and would not stop asking. He let it. He wasn't going to argue with it, he thought. I have just sent the most important person I have to the most dangerous position in this engagement, because it was the right decision, and she was the right person, and I am not going to let what I feel about it interfere with what she is. He thought. If anything happens to her, I will burn every one of them to the ground. I will take the field apart wolf by wolf, and I will not stop. He thought, that is not a thing I am allowed to think about. She is not a thing I am allowed to lose, so she is coming back from that wall. He said it in the empty room very quietly to nothing. She is coming back from that wall. Then he went back to work. The 4 weeks that followed were some of the hardest she'd known since the mountain, and they were also, she recognized without ceremony, some of the best work she had ever done. Before dawn in the eastern yard, after dark in the war room. 80 wolves, the senior warriors Riker had released, technically excellent and carrying mild skepticism, and the secondary tier she'd built herself, raw and loyal and entirely hers in the way, a cohort became yours when you'd sweat with them long enough. She handled the skepticism the way she handled everything she wasn't sure would receive her. She let the work make the argument. First day, she ran the Eastern approach drill, and it was rough, and she said so. Said exactly where they were and where they needed to be and precisely how they'd get there. No performance, just the problem and the plan. By the second week, the senior warriors had stopped looking at her with the skeptical quality and started looking at her with the other one, the look she recognized from her Silvermane squad, the one that said, "We trust your judgment." She received it quietly. It was the best thing she knew how to be given. Dylan came to watch the sessions. She knew the quality of his attention by now, the particular way he stood at the yard wall. Not oversight. The thorough way he watched things he cared about. She didn't break her rhythm for it. She noticed, though, the thing under the watching. She had come to know his face well enough to read what was beneath the composed surface. She had cataloged him across 4 months the way she cataloged terrain, patiently, without announcing it, building a map she could navigate in the dark. She knew the line of tension across his shoulders when he was holding something. She knew the particular quality of his stillness when he was carrying a calculation he hadn't resolved. When he stood at the eastern yard wall and watched her run the engagement drills, there were 2 things in his face. The first, pride. Absolute, thorough, not performed. The same look he had when the pack did something cleanly, but with an intensity underneath it that he didn't have for anyone else. She had noticed it the first time, and it had done something inconvenient to her chest, and she had gone back to her work. The second, fear, held with extreme discipline. Managed the way he managed anything he'd decided was not going to interfere with his judgment. But it was there, and she could see it, and she had the sense of something vast and patient underneath the surface of him, something that was only barely being kept from the room. She didn't say anything about it. She watched him watch her, and she let him carry it, and she went back to her drills. She ran them harder after that. He came out onto the yard at the end of the 3rd week and waited until the last wolf had gone. "The secondary tier," he said, "they're ahead of where I expected. They've been training together for 2 months. They know each other. You built that." "Yes." He was quiet in the way he went quiet before deliberate words. "I should have made you welcome when you arrived," he said. "I knew what the alliance cost you. I kept you at a distance for weeks because you weren't what I'd expected, and I was deciding whether to adjust." He held her gaze. "That was wrong. You came around," she said, "later than I should have. Dylan." She stepped toward him. "You put out a space for my weapons storage the first night. You gave me every briefing you gave your senior warriors. You let me walk your borders alone." She looked at him steadily. "You were adjusting the whole time." Something open in his face, in the way she'd only started seeing in recent months. "Still," he said. "Still," she agreed. "But we're here now." He tucked a piece of hair back from her face, a motion so ordinary and so exactly right that it made her chest ache, and she turned into his hand. "We're here now," he said. They argued in the evenings. The supply argument was a good one. She wanted 15% increase in Eastern Wall rations. He said 12. They went through the arithmetic and landed on 14, which was where she'd known they'd land when she'd started at 15. He noted this. "That's manipulative," he said. "It's effective. They're not mutually exclusive." He checked her figures. She watched him do it, the focused quality he brought to numbers, his pen moving down the column with the same meticulousness he brought to everything he'd decided mattered. He checked everything she gave him not because he doubted her, but because he checked everything, and that consistency was the same quality that had built a pack that had never lost a wolf, and she loved it. He put the pen down. He was quiet for a moment, looking at her figures. "Have I ever won one of these?" he said. "The spring patrol rotation," she said. "Southern Circuit. I was wrong about the approach time, and I told you so. 2 months ago, you should have savored it." He looked at her for a moment, the long, level look she'd learned to read. She could see it then, underneath the pen and the supply ledger and the quiet practicality of the argument. He was thinking about standing at the western flank with no way to see the east. He was thinking about her figures on a piece of paper in his hand with 160 miles of compound between them and no way to know if she was still standing, his wolf. She could feel it sometimes, through the bond, a low, dark pressure. Not anger, something more animal than anger. Something that wanted to plant itself in front of her and face whatever was coming on her behalf and was being overruled by the man it lived in. She said nothing about it. She wrote down 14% and gathered her papers. Go to sleep, she said. You need it. So do you? I know where to find you. He caught her hand before she reached the door. Not hard, just a hand around her wrist, and she stopped. He didn't say anything. She turned back and looked at him. I'll be on the eastern wall, she said. Not in the ground. He let her go. The night before the intelligence confirmed Valdez was moving, she came to his quarters and she didn't go back to her own. She had been migrating for weeks, her presence without announcement. The wall at night was theirs. The morning coffee appeared in his kitchen, made by her at first light. There was a blade on his table she hadn't moved, that he'd walked past every morning for 3 weeks without comment. That night she lay with her back against his chest in the dark. When it comes, she said. When it comes, he said, I'm leading the eastern wall. I know, she was quiet. He had his arm around her and felt the shape of what she wasn't saying and the specific quality of her stillness. Say it, he said, she breathed out. I know what I'm doing. I've run hard operations and I've brought everyone home and I'm going to do that again. A pause. I also know this is the largest thing I've run. And the people I'd lose aren't strangers. She felt his arm tighten around her. I need you to know I understand what's at stake, not just strategically, all of it. I know you understand it, he said. That's why I gave you the wall. She turned over in the dark and found his face. Does it scare you? She said. That I'm leading it. He was quiet for a long moment. The particular quiet that meant he was going to answer honestly instead of strategically. Yes, he said. She held that. It scares me in a way I don't have words for, he said. My wolf has been, he stopped. Started again. There are things I can control. I put my people in the best positions I can. I know their capabilities, I make sound decisions, I control what I can control. 8 years, that's been enough. A pause. I have never run an engagement where one of the variables was someone I cannot lose. She was very still. Every morning I stand at that wall and watch you work, he said. And I see exactly what you are. I see the way your wolves look at you, and I see the way you think, and there are moments, he breathed out. There are moments when what I feel watching you is something I don't know what to do with, because it is pride. Complete, absolute pride. And underneath it is the worst fear I have ever had in my life. Dylan, I gave you the wall because you are the right person for it, he said. I gave you the wall because when I saw you on that altar in your armor, I knew what you were before I knew your name. I have never been confused about what you are. His voice, in the dark. But I am going to stand on the western flank and not see you. And if something happens, he stopped. She waited. If something happens, he said very quietly, and she could hear beneath it the thing he was not saying, the thing that lived in his wolf and had no clean shape and language, I will come for every single one of them. I will come for them and I will not stop, she understood. She pressed her hand flat to his chest. I know, she said. Come back from that wall, he said. That is the only thing I am asking of you. She looked at him in the dark. She thought about all the ways the people in her life had responded to who she was, the ones who had been proud of her from a safe distance, the ones who had tried to manage it, the ones who had simply never seen it at all. She thought about the mating ceremony she hadn't gone to, the alpha who had wanted a Luna, not a warrior, she thought. He is afraid down to his bones, and he is giving me the wall anyway. Not in spite of what he feels, because of it. Because he saw her on an altar in her armor and recognized her, and love for this man meant seeing the thing clearly and refusing to make it smaller. She had not known that was the shape love could take. If something happens to me, she said, her voice very steady, don't do anything stupid. A pause. Define stupid. She laughed, a short, startled thing, and felt his mouth curve against the top of her head. Come back from that wall, he said again. Quiet, absolute. I love you, she said. Simply the way she said things she'd decided needed saying. I'm saying it now so we both know it's been said. I know, he said. That is the most. I love you, he said. Also. Was that hard? Somewhat. You need more practice. I have time, he said. Sleep. She made a noise of protest. But she turned back into him and pulled his arm around her and felt the bond warm between them, and the compound was quiet, and she let herself fall asleep with his heartbeat against her ear. Chapter 11. They came at dawn. Dylan had been awake for the hour before it, the pack scent stirring him, the wolf knowing before the human caught up. He was dressed and at the war room before Garrett arrived, and the first scout's confirmation came in 11 minutes after. Valdez. Eastern approach. 230 wolves. He moved through the compound with the precision of 8 years of preparation, running exactly as built. The pack responded to it. 20 minutes from sleeping to positioned, every wolf in place, no confusion. He found Kiera at the eastern wall. He had felt her through the bond before he reached her, the thread of it warm and entirely steady, which was more than he could say for himself. She was already in her field kit, dual blades at her back, the silver-gray war paint at her cheekbones she'd worn since Silvermane. Running through final position confirmations with the senior warriors, low and quick, completely in command. She broke off when she saw him coming. Eastern units positioned, she said. Secondary tier on the inner wall, senior warriors on the approach lines. We're ready. He looked at her. He had a moment and he used it, let himself look at her the way he looked at her in the dark when she was asleep and couldn't see him doing it. She was in her armor and her war paint, and every line of her radiated exactly who she was, who she had always been, who she had been on that altar in the first moment he'd seen her and known, before he'd known her name, before he'd known anything, that this was the person. This was the one his wolf had gone still for, 6 weeks of fear, and he was looking at the reason for it. He let her see some of it. Not all. Enough. She looked back at him and let him see hers, not the managed version. The full version for 1 second in the yard with the compound waking up around them. Stay close to the wall, he said. I know my position. I know you know it. His hand came to the back of her neck, brief and firm, and his wolf steadied a fraction at the contact. Stay close to the wall. She put her palm flat against his chest. 1 second, just the warmth of it, and through the bond, I know what this costs you. I see it, I'm coming back. Go run your pack, she said. I'll hold the east. He went. He had to. He knew that. He had made the call 6 weeks ago in the empty war room, and it had been the right call, and he had known it would feel exactly like this, like walking away from the most important thing he had ever been asked to protect. He walked through the compound toward the western flank and felt the distance between them open up, and his wolf did not forgive him for it. She is fine, he told himself. She knows that terrain. She built those wolves. She has been building toward this since before she arrived. His wolf informed him, with great clarity, that it did not care. He ran the western flank the way he had always run an engagement, calculated, thorough, managing the variables he could manage. But underneath everything, through the whole long morning, a thread of his attention ran constantly toward the east. Not the Alpha's strategic monitoring of his defensive positions. Something older and less disciplined, the surface bond pulling, warm and present, telling him she was there, she was holding, she was all right. He checked it the way he breathed. He checked it without meaning to, checked it mid-sentence giving orders, checked it while reading the engagement maps Garrett brought to his hand. He could not have stopped checking it if he'd tried, and he did not try. 4 hours, the bond said. She is there. She is there. She is there, and he held the west. The eastern wall held for 4 hours. She ran it the way she'd planned, approach lines absorbing the first wave, secondary tier sealing the gaps, senior warriors rotating so no one exhausted before the critical point. She knew what Valdez was doing, testing, probing for the fracture, holding back his full numbers. She matched his patience. She moved up and down the line between waves, adjusting, closing gaps before they opened. She tracked her wolves through the pack sense and through her eyes Kale at the second segment, steady in the way she'd been almost certain of. Lena at the northern splice, holding a position she'd been trained for exactly, and she was holding it. The second wave hit harder. She'd expected it. She pulled 2 units from the inner wall and pushed them to the forward line 30 meters out, and the second wave hit reinforced positions instead of thinned ones. She moved to the forward line herself because that was where she was needed. It was brutal in the honest way of battles. She was aware of making decisions, aware of her body doing the work, and underneath both, the bond pulling faintly toward the main compound, steady as a compass, telling her Dylan was holding. The western flank was intact, he was there. She held the east. Dylan was in the western corridor when the pack sense spiked. He knew the difference. 8 years of running and engagement had calibrated him to the normal pulse of a hard fight, the surges, the dips, the rhythm of a battle finding its shape. The spike was different. The spike was wrong, and it came from the east, and it came from her direction, and he had the calculation finished before the spike had fully registered. Flanking push. 4 minutes from closing. The position she was in. He looked at the western line and he looked at the bond link, and the decision was not a decision at all, not really, not when his wolf was already running. It was just the acknowledgement of something that had always been true, that there was no version of this morning in which he stood at the western flank and felt her go down and did not move. "Garrett," he said, "hold the angle, 3 minutes, then press." Dylan, he was already running. He had told himself for 6 weeks that he would trust her. He had told himself she was the right person, it had been the right call, he was going to hold to the decision he'd made in the empty war room. He had held to it through the whole long morning, and he was not holding to it now, and he was not sorry. He ran through the compound with the specific clarity of a man who has found the one variable he cannot manage and has stopped pretending otherwise. He came around the eastern corner and saw Valdez, the general engagement. Valdez himself and 4 senior wolves at the eastern forward line, they'd found the gap, threaded through it, because Valdez understood what every alpha understood. The fastest way to break a pack was to take the thing the alpha couldn't afford to lose. Dylan saw the logic from the outside with cold, absolute clarity. He also saw Kiera 40 feet ahead. 3 wolves engaged simultaneously, managing it with the angle and timing and relentless intelligent pressure he had watched through every training session for 4 weeks, and she was handling it. She was handling it. But Valdez was 8 feet behind her and closing, and she didn't have eyes on him, and Dylan had a single, unambiguous thought, not fear. Something past fear, something with no name he had words for, and then he stopped thinking and started moving. He reached the senior wolves. He fought with everything he had. Not the measured precision of a man running a strategic engagement. Everything, the full weight of 8 years and 4 months, and a morning of holding the western flank and checking the bond like breathing. He put down 2 wolves and kept going because the math hadn't resolved yet, because Valdez was still 6 feet from her back and closing, and if she went down, he would burn this field to ash. He would not stop. He would never stop. Every wolf Valdez had absorbed would answer for it, every one of them, and he would. The 3rd wolf came from an angle he didn't see. He hit the ground. The weight of it enormous. He was calculating options he didn't have enough of, and Valdez was closing 5 feet 4, and underneath the calculation he had one clear thought, very specific, like a voice in a quiet room. I have not told her enough. She should know that she was right about the eastern wall. Right about Darius. Right about Riker's secondary tier, and the spring patrol rotation, and the drainage problem in the northern quarter, and 100 other things. She should know that she had made this pack into something it wasn't before her, that she had walked into his compound with her notebook and her charcoal diagrams and her refusal to be anything other than entirely herself, and she had changed everything, changed him, and he had been slow about it, and he had not said. Both her blades hit simultaneously. One into the wolf on his chest. One passed his ear close enough that he felt the air move, and Valdez went down. The forward line went quiet. Dylan got up. She was 2 feet away. Breathing hard, armor cut at the ribs, blood on her jaw, blades already back in her hands, looking at him with every wall completely down, not the managed version, not the careful version. The full version. The one she had given him gradually over months, arriving all at once, then the bond broke open. Not the surface bond. Not the thin thread of the mating ceremony that had connected them since the mountain. Something that had been building since the training room, since the lodge fire, since the wall at dusk with the compound below them, all of it arriving at once, the way a dam breaks, sudden and total and final. His presence in her chest where there had only been a thread. The full weight of what he felt, enormous, her name woven through every part of it, and through the bond, flowing back, hers. The full, unhidden truth of what she felt for him, and it was not what she'd shown him. It was larger. It had been larger since the training room, and she had been careful with it, had kept it in proportion because she had not known what he was carrying, and now she knew, and she was not being careful. He heard himself make a sound he had never made before. His wolf went absolutely still. Not the pacing, straining animal that had been wearing a groove behind his ribs for 6 weeks. Still the way it had gone still on the altar when he'd first seen her, but deeper. The recognition of something fully arrived. "Dylan," she said. Her voice came out different. He crossed the 2 feet. His hands found her face, and he kissed her hard, and felt it through the bond as well as in his body, and it was more than he had been built for, and he did not care. Through the bond he felt her receive it, the warmth of it, the size of it, and through the bond he felt her, all of her, everything she had been careful with. He pulled back and looked at her. He was aware, distantly, that his eyes were very bright, and he could not find the part of himself that was supposed to manage that. "I felt you," she said. She meant, "I felt what you carry for me. I have been looking at you from the outside for 4 months, and I thought I understood, and I didn't understand at all. I felt all of it." "I know," he said. He was right there. "I know. You were on the ground, I know." His thumbs at her jaw. "You threw both blades." "I wasn't going to be tidy about it," she said. Something moved through his face close to the real laugh in the middle of a battlefield with her blood on his hands, and she felt it through the bond, and then her eyes were wet and she looked genuinely furious at herself, which was so entirely her that it went through him like light. "There's still a battle," she said. "Yes." "We should." "Yes." Neither of them moved. "I love you," she said. "I said it last night. I'm saying it again because I just felt what it looks like from your side." Her voice steady, the way she said things she had decided needed to be said. "I want to say it while we both know what it costs." He held her face. He looked at her, not the alpha, not the managed professional, just Dylan, entirely himself, with nothing between him and what he felt. "It was always going to be yours," he said. "The pack. This place, I was just slow to get there." She looked at him. He watched her receive it, the thing she had not let herself want too clearly for too long, not a title, not an alliance outcome. Already hers, waiting for him to catch up. "I know," she said. He kissed her again, brief, certain, a promise, and stepped back. "Eastern wall," he said. "I have it," she said. She picked up her blades and went back to the line, and he watched her go, and felt her through the bond, warm and steady and entirely herself, and thought, "Come back from that wall." She came back. The battle ran 2 more hours, but its spine had broken when Valdez fell. By mid-morning, the eastern fields were clear. Kiera stood at the forward position with her wolves around her and felt the battle go still. She looked out at the eastern approach, the tree line she had mapped in her second week, the terrain she had walked alone with her notebook, and felt the bond in her chest like a second heartbeat, permanent now, all the way open. Her boots were ruined. A cut at her ribs that needed attention, blood drying on her jaw, 3 wolves for the healer, 4 positions to reseal, a report that would take half the night to write. Her wolf lay down in the back of her mind with the satisfaction of something that had been waiting a very long time. "Luna," Riker at her shoulder, that expression, the sincere one he hadn't planned. "You held the East." "We held the East," she said. He was quiet for a moment. Then, "In 23 years of this pack, I have never seen a Luna lead a line." He held her gaze. "I will not forget this. None of us will." She thought about Riker on day 16, recalibrating. She thought about all the small things that had accumulated without announcement, trust built not through declaration, but through the work, wolf by wolf, week by week. She thought about Kale and Lena and the secondary tier, her wolves, who had moved when she asked and held what she gave them and brought everyone home. She thought, this is what it means to have a pack. "Where's the alpha?" she said, western corridor, finishing the northern engagement. Riker paused. "He pulled from the western flank, Luna, came east." She looked at the ground where Valdez had fallen. She thought about Dylan at the yard wall every day for 4 weeks, that thing beneath his composed face that she had noticed and not examined. She thought about what he had told her in the dark. "Yes, it scares me, not because you can't do it, but because I won't be able to see you." She thought about him saying, "I have nowhere else to be," with his hands on her face in the middle of a battlefield. She thought, "He was afraid for 6 weeks and he gave me the wall and then he came anyway, and both of those things are true, and both of them are the same thing, and that thing is love, and I understand it now." "I know," she said. She found Dylan at the compound gate at midday. She felt him through the bond before she saw him, warm, steady, the permanent quality that would take some getting used to, and he turned before she was close enough for normal hearing. The medical lead excused herself and went elsewhere. Dylan looked at her. His eyes went to the cut at her ribs. "It's bound," she said. "Not deep." "I know." His thumb brushed her jaw, the dried blood there, careful. "I felt you on that wall the whole 4 hours." "I felt you go down," she said. "Through the bond, I was 40 feet away and I felt the moment you hit the ground." She held his gaze. "You pulled from the western flank." "Yes." "That could have." "Garrett had it," he said. "Garrett has had everything I've given him for 8 years." The western flank was not going to fail. He held her gaze. "I had somewhere else to be." She was quiet. "Does that mean the strategic decision was sound," she said, "or that you couldn't help it?" He looked at her for a long moment. Both, he said. It means both. I knew Garrett had the angle and I was gone before I finished knowing it. He paused. I have been afraid of losing you since the day you told me you were taking that wall. I have been afraid of it every morning at the yard, every briefing, every night. I gave you the wall because it was right and because you were the right person and because I know what you are. And then I felt the bonds spike and every calculation I had done for 6 weeks stopped mattering. She stepped forward. He was behind me, she said. I know. I would have seen him. I know. His jaw held. I know you would have. You see everything. A pause. I came anyway. She was quiet for a moment, looking at him. He had the unmanaged quality he only had with her. All of it visible, the fear and the love and the specific relief of a man who had been certain of something for 6 weeks and had been proved right and was still not settled. She stepped in and put her face against his shoulder. He held her more carefully than she deserved, given the state of both of them, armor, blood, a day's worth of battle between them, and she pressed her face into his neck and felt the bond hum warm between them and thought about all the things that were worth coming back for. Thank you, she said. Very quiet. He went still. For what? He said. For knowing what I needed to be. She felt his arm tighten around her. For giving me the wall when your wolf was screaming at you to keep me off it. I saw it every day. I know what it cost and you gave it to me anyway. She paused. That's the bravest thing I've ever seen anyone do. He was quiet for a long time. You came back from the wall, he said finally, low, like something he had been saying to himself for hours and was still saying. That's all I needed. Everything else, the wall, the command, all of it, it was yours. It was always going to be yours. A pause where she felt through the bond the enormity of the thing he was about to say, the thing he had been sitting with all day. If something had happened, there is nothing that would have stopped me. Nothing. I would have come for every single wolf on that field, and I would not have stopped until there was nothing left to come for. She held on. She believed him completely. I know, she said. I know you know, he said. I needed to say it. She lifted her head and looked at him. He looked back, the full version, nothing between him and what he felt. She thought about a man who had built 8 years of pack on his ability to control the variables, who had spent 6 weeks managing the fear of losing the one variable he couldn't bear to lose, and had done the right thing anyway, right up until the moment he hadn't, and she could not find it in herself to be anything but grateful for both. We have a lot of work to do, she said. Tonight, he said. Right now, stay here. She stayed. 5 minutes, not more, with the compound's recovery moving around them. But she stayed, and his arm was around her, and the bond was warm and permanent between them, and she thought, I know what love costs now. I have seen it from both sides. She thought, I came back from the wall, she thought, that was enough. Chapter 12. Recovery was not orderly, which was the nature of recovery. Dylan was at the medical wing every morning at first light, walking the beds with Cyan. Kiera was with him for the first 3 days. Her ribs were bound. She was under orders to avoid heavy training, and Cyan was a woman who had survived previous lunas and several wars and had the specific implacable quality of someone who was done being underestimated. Avoiding heavy training, Cyan said on the second morning, means no sparring, no weapons drills, no demonstrating technique, no anything that involves those ribs working harder than walking. What does it allow? Kiera asked. Walking, map review, supervision from 10 feet. 10 feet is 10 feet. Kiera went to find Dylan. Your healer is very specific about distances. Cyan knows you, he said. She has known you since your second week, when you came in with the bruised ribs from the Riker rematch and told her it was nothing. It was mostly nothing. 3 cracked ribs. They were significantly along in the healing process. They were 4 days old. She looked at him. He was enjoying this, the slight quality of satisfaction in his composed face that she could read now as easily as words on a page. And through the bond she could feel the warmth underneath it, the specific warmth of a man who was finding pleasure in a mundane argument because the alternative, the version of today in which there was no argument, was something he had been too close to, and he was not done being grateful. She understood. She let him enjoy it. How are the numbers? She said, which was what she'd come to ask. 14 wolves requiring extended medical attention. No fatalities. She paused. No fatalities on the eastern wall. He crossed to her. Say it again, he said. Out loud. She looked at him. No fatalities on the eastern wall. Again. Dylan, you have been counting them since the battle ended, he said. I know because you went to the medical wing before you came to me. I know because it is what you do, you account for every one of them, you will be accounting for them for weeks. Say it. She looked at him for a moment. She recognized the thing he was asking for, not reassurance, not performance. He wanted to hear it in her voice, the real count, because he had been running it through his own head since the eastern field had gone quiet, and he needed to hear it from her. She breathed in. No fatalities on the eastern wall, she said. 80 wolves, 4 hours. Everyone came home. He put his hands on her face, very careful of the ribs, and his forehead came to hers, and she felt through the bond the enormous exhale of it, the weight he had been carrying since she disappeared toward the eastern corridor that morning, finally setting down. Good, she managed. He kissed her forehead and held it for a moment, and she let herself feel the warmth of it and thought about all the names she'd been running through since the battle ended like a prayer: Kale, Lena, her secondary tier, her wolves, her responsibility, home, all of them. Home, the pack healed and the compound rebuilt, and the story of the battle moved through Ironridge the way all stories moved through it, through Mara first, then everywhere at once. The positioning shift in the second wave. Dylan leaving the western flank. The bond forming in the middle of the eastern field, which 20 wolves had felt directly, and the rest of the pack had felt through the network. And Kale told Mara it had felt like a door opening, like something that had always been about to happen finally did, and Mara had told everyone. Mara found Kiera in the corridor outside the war room with the expression of someone who had been collecting evidence personally and was ready to present it. Riker made an announcement at the evening meal, Mara said. He stood at the long table. She stopped. What did he say? He said Ironridge had found its true bond. He said that anyone, he was very clear, who had ever doubted the Luna was welcome to bring that to him directly. Mara looked at the ceiling. He said it in his battle voice. Kiera thought about Riker on day 16, recalibrating. She thought about all the small things that had accumulated without announcement, trust built through the work, wolf by wolf, week by week, without declaration. Tell Riker I want a full Eastern cohort drill on Thursday, she said. I want to see what they do after a real engagement. Mara looked at her. That's all you're going to say? What else is there to say? That you're pleased, that the pack loves you? I know. Her voice came out softer than she'd intended. She looked at Mara, who had been there since nearly the beginning, who had told her she was thinking loudly and kept looking at her with that warm, particular quality that meant, I see you. I know, she said again. I'm just not very loud about it. Mara studied her for a moment. Then, he cried, she said, at the evening meal, when Riker made the announcement, the Alpha. Kiera was quiet. She had felt it through the bond from across the compound, the particular quality of it, not performance, not the clean release of relief, something larger. Something that had been held for a very long time, pressed down under 8 years of pack and composure and decisions made correctly and carried alone, and let go in the middle of a dining hall in front of his wolves, because he had stopped being able to hold it and had stopped trying. She had stood on the other side of the compound and felt it move through the bond and had put her hand flat to her sternum, where the bond lived, and held it. I know, she said. She had understood in that moment that she had not been the only one waiting to come home. The true bond ceremony was held on the night of the next full moon, 12 days after the battle. The true bond had already formed on the eastern field in front of 20 wolves in the middle of a battle. The pack had felt it move through the network, warm and permanent. The ceremony was not for the bond. It was for all the rest of it. The months of watching, the compound that had been holding its breath since a warrior Luna had walked in at dawn and started mapping its borders without being asked. It was for Etta and Riker and Kale and Mara and every wolf who had been paying attention since the first week. It was for Dylan and Kiera too, because some things needed ritual, needed the weight of tradition, to be given the shape they deserved. The pack gathered at the great clearing. Quieter than any gathering before it, not the loose warmth of the harvest run. Something fuller, the way a room sounds when everyone in it has been waiting for something and knows it has arrived. Kiera stood at the clearing's edge and looked at all of them. Garrett at the far side of the circle, the expression he had when something landed and he wasn't going to discuss it. Mara at the front, not even pretending. Riker with his arms crossed and his jaw set and his eyes very bright, the expression of a man who had spent 23 years in this pack watching for the thing that would make it whole and was standing in front of it. Kale and Lena beside him. Her secondary tier, her cohort, the wolves she had built and who had held the wall. And Etta, the eldest founding member, who had been here before Dylan, was Alpha, standing at the inner edge of the circle with the expression of someone watching something they had waited a very long time to see. She felt them all through the pack sense. This particular texture she had been learning for months, each voice in the collective hum becoming known to her, becoming hers. She had not expected to love them like this. She had come here with her notebook and her maps and her plan to be useful, to hold up her end of an alliance and get through the year. She had not expected to be standing at the edge of a clearing feeling the pack sense warm with something that was, if she was honest, love going in both directions. Dylan came to stand beside her. She felt him before he arrived, through the bond, through the pack sense, through the specific warmth she'd been carrying in her chest for months, fully open now. She looked up at him. He looked at her, nothing managed in either direction. "Ready?" he said. "Since the training room," she said. He almost smiled, the real one from the middle. She felt it through the bond before it reached his face. They shifted. Her wolf crossed the clearing to his, and his wolf turned to meet her, forehead to forehead, the way he had the first run, the way he always did, and she felt the bond in wolf form as something larger than in human form, which shouldn't have been possible and was. His wolf, still. Not the pacing animal she had felt behind his ribs for 6 weeks. Still and present, with the quality of something that has found the thing it was built to find. They ran the territory boundary. Both of them, the full perimeter of Ironridge, in the dark and the cold and the moonlight. And every step of it was known to her. She had walked it alone in her second week with her notebook, learning a place she hadn't chosen as though she had, not knowing what she was doing. Thinking she was doing reconnaissance. Building her home, choosing happened in layers. You couldn't choose where you were sent. You could choose what you did when you got there. You could choose what you built and who you became while building it and whether you let it matter. She had let all of it matter. They came back to the clearing. The pack was still. The moon was fully up and the clearing silver bright, and every face she loved was looking at them. They shifted back at the clearing's center. The true bond ceremony had no formal words. It had the mark. He turned to her and she looked up at him, the clearing full of their pack, the moon overhead, 4 months and a battle and a wall she'd held behind them, and in his face was everything. Not managed, not composed. Everything he had, the pride and the love and the fear that had lived in him for 6 weeks and been overruled every day by the man it lived in. It was all visible. He had stopped trying to hold it back and she could see every part of it and she loved every part of it. He lowered his head. His mouth found the curve of her neck and shoulder, and she felt his teeth, careful and deliberate, both question and answer, and the mark landed and the bond opened, not broke open. Opened the way something opens that was always meant to. The bond that had formed on the eastern field finding its full size, flooding warm into every part of her, and she pressed her hands flat to his chest and felt him through it. The whole complicated, thorough weight of him, every layer she had been learning and was not finished learning and was going to spend the rest of her life learning. She found the place on his throat, his pulse under her lips. Then her teeth, deliberate and certain, and she felt him go absolutely still. The same quality she'd felt from his wolf in the clearing, the stillness of something that has arrived, and through the bond she felt him feel her, all of her, and she felt what that was for him. She understood now. She had seen it from the outside and she understood. When she pulled back, they were both breathing wrong, and his forehead came to hers the way it always did, and she closed her eyes. The pack made a sound, not cheers. Not celebration. The warm, quiet sound of 100 people who have been watching something build for months and have seen it arrive, and are simply, fully glad. She heard Mara not composing herself. She heard, from the direction of Riker, a man who had decided he was not accountable for this. She felt through the pack sense the warm surge of it, all of them, her pack, theirs, the bond moving through the network the way pack bonds do, a warmth that belonged to everyone. She felt Etta at the edge of the circle. From Etta through the network something like recognition. Like, yes, this is what we were missing. This is what we needed. It is here. Dylan lifted his head. He looked at her completely himself, nothing held back, and in his face was everything she had worked to see for 4 months, everything he had given her carefully, and then all at once, everything his wolf had known on an altar before he'd known her name. Luna, he said, her name in his mouth, meaning specifically her. Alpha, she said back. He kissed her in the clearing in front of their entire pack, unhurried and complete, and the pack sense surged warm around them, and somewhere in the middle of it she smiled against his mouth and felt him feel it through the bond and felt him smile back. And for a moment the whole clearing was just that. 2 people, fully known, A bond that had cost something and been worth every part of it. This, she thought, this is enough. This is so much more than enough. Later, in the dark, she said, "You cried." Cold air. There was no wind. Cold air doesn't require wind. Dylan. She propped herself up. He was looking at the ceiling with the expression of a man committed to a position he could not defend. "Mara told me. Riker told Garrett. It has been communicated through multiple channels. I had an involuntary physiological response to a moving ceremony. You were in the dining hall. Riker was doing his battle voice. Riker is an emotional man. He was talking about you. He was quiet." She watched the committed expression give way slowly to the real one, the unmanaged version. Just him underneath. "Yeah," he said. Very quiet, she lay back down. Head on his chest, his heartbeat under her ear, familiar now, the bond warm between them like a hearthstone. She thought about an evening meal she hadn't been at, and a man who had held his pack together for 8 years alone, and Riker's battle voice, and what it cost to be known. "Me too," she said. His arm came around her. Outside, Ironridge was quiet, her pack their pack, the place she had not chosen and could not imagine having missed. She lay in the dark and let herself think about all of it. Not with grief. Not with the complicated mixture of loss and gratitude she had carried for months. Just, clearly, fully, without reservation. She thought about a Wednesday and a storage barn and a dress in the back of a car. She thought about the plan she'd had, a good plan, built carefully over years. She thought about the future she had watched fold itself away and had genuinely grieved because it had mattered, and the grief had been real. And she thought, I would not change it, not as a consolation. Not as something she was telling herself to manage the grief. As a true thing about the shape of her life, to a compound in the Eastern Territories, to a pack she had learned wolf by wolf, to an alpha who had been afraid for 6 weeks and given her the wall anyway and come for her when it mattered and cried in a dining hall when Riker said her name in his battle voice. To this room in the dark with his arm around her, the bond between them permanent and warm and entirely itself. She thought, I would not change a single thing. She closed her eyes. She slept.